All right. So, without further ado, I have a guest joining us today. How's it going, Mark?
Yeah, good, mate. Thank you so much. Please do call me Mark as well. I don't sure in the pre sort of said Mr. Reid, and I'm already spilling coffee all over myself, and just doing terrible stuff in the background here as I'm listening. But thank you for having me on. It's really good to be here, and thank you everybody for giving me your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
It's our pleasure here as well.
Ugh.
So before we get started, I would like to ask, just for those who may not know, um, who are you and what do you do here on YouTube? Obviously, you've been on here with the open rooms a couple times, so a lot of people, at least
Yeah.
in my rooms, might know you. But nevertheless, just in case somebody doesn't, what's a little bit about yourself, a little introduction before we get started?
Yeah, I'm Mark Reid. I am a curious person. I'm sort of I am a counter apologist. I used to be sort of very agnostic atheist. I find myself more and more sort of going into the hard atheism camp these days, from certain things that sort of have occurred to me as I've gone along in my journey. I generally like debating. I like putting ideas up against one another and sort of rationally assessing where the problems are, where the flaws are. So I really do enjoy the sort of cut and thrust of debate more than anything else. But I do like discussions and things as well. I think it's when we compare ideas and see which ones hold more merit is where we get to that really moving along our own ideas and making our own ideas better. But I've been on Standing for Truth. I've been on Modern Day Debate. I've been on a number of debate programs. I've done discussions in a lot of places. I sometimes interview people on my channel. So I do a whole bunch of things, but mostly I'm a secular humanist, and sort of so I take my position and my worldview from humanism.
All right. Thank you for that. And by the way, guys, right now there is no links, but I'm going to go back and edit this like I have been with the last couple videos. So if you guys want to check out a little bit of what Mark does on his channel, you certainly can do so. So if you're watching this after the fact, you're like, well, what are you talking about? There's already a link down there. Well, yeah, that's because I went back and edited it. But for those of you who are here live, there is currently no description at all. So yeah, we'll have that set up in a moment. So the reason we are here today, the last couple conversations we've had in the open rooms have been either tiptoeing. Oh my goodness, I can't even speak today. Tiptoeing around the subject of morality, or just outright discussing it. And so I figured that we should have a conversation probably on that.
Yeah.
Before we jump in, and I'll do the same as well. What's a little bit of your view on morality, how it's grounded, if at all, what things constitute ethics, so on and so forth, just so the people understand.
Yeah, so I mean, morality I'd sort of describe as the as far as I know, it's used in two ways. It's used descriptively and it's used normatively. So you're talking about a code of conduct that should apply, or that applies across a population segment of people. So that's morality. So when you're talking about it descriptively, you're saying, hey, this is the morality of Japan. They have this code of conduct under certain conditions. When you're talking about it normatively, you're talking about what ought to be, what should be the code of conduct given any given population. So what we see is a lot of moral diversity. Different places have different moral standards. So I'm a meta-ethical relativist, meaning that the meta-ethics is sort of the study of where morals are taking you, what the aim of morals is, what the goal of morals is. So, for instance, a theist meta-ethics might be to worship and sort of to create the glory of God, or to glorify God in some way. To that would be their aim. That would be their meta-ethics, and then the morality would flow from that. Personally, I think that my meta-ethical goal is the flourishing of humanity, or the well-being of humanity, perhaps you could describe it as. I don't think there's anything objective saying that we have to do that, apart from human desire to do that. Once you do have that, though, we can then make some, well, I mean, they're still stance dependent, so they're not really objective decisions, but we can make decisions that aren't really arguable in virtue of that goal. So it's sort of moral relativism one step removed. Sometimes it's described as a framework, meta ethics. So when your ethics come in, it's how your individual actions apply to this morality. So if I have morals that I don't kill people, the decisions that I personally make as an individual are what applies to that morality. So if I avoid cutting a rope to let some, that's an ethical action in accordance with my morality, or the morality that I have. I think those morals are grounded more or less biologically, and I think there's a lot of good evidence for that. I think that the main toolkit that social species have are empathy and reciprocity. They work in tandem so that organisms can sort of get along, and we see that in social organisms all the time. We can actually document that through various scientific studies. We notice that non-social species, i.e. sort of lone species like cats and things like that, they have less of these sort of social tendencies, and therefore less of empathy and reciprocity kicking in. So I think it is grounded in biology, but I wouldn't raise those feelings to be morality. I think it has to be a code of conduct, which I had a really interesting debate over whether animals had morality with hive science, and I think that one was really contentious. It was one of the most vicious debates I've been in, and it was just over animals. But yeah, it was kind of, I don't think animals have morality. I think it has to be a code of conduct. And I think while you can sort of have a proto-morality, sort of a, a general inclination to do things in animals, I don't think it rises to the level of morality in humans, where we actually codify it, put it down and say, hey, that is moral, that is not moral, kind of thing. So yeah, and that's a brief overview. And just as an aside, I think morality is one of the most complex subjects that you can ever discuss. Like the intricacies of it are complex, and if you go into even trolley problems, you're going to get into incredible complexities of whether something's right and wrong, and it becomes very, very grey. So I want people to keep that in mind, that sometimes there is no easy answer of right and wrong. Anyway, you might disagree. I think there is, and I think that a lot of morality comes into grey areas and differences in what people's meta-ethical aims actually are.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so for the audience to know kind of a little bit about my own theories, and then of course we'll get into the back and forth discussion here. So I tend to be, it's weird. In a sense, I kind of agree in that I do think this is a very complicated subject. I think it has to be by necessity. Like I've said before, I think that, for example, if you're a moral absolutist who believes in an objective morality, then consequentialism is necessarily a result of what you believe, which a lot of people think of consequentialism as its own branch. So that in and of it, and the only reason I bring that up is to say it's a complication, right? It is a very complicated issue, I think. What exactly constitutes objective can be a complicated issue. And then, of course, moral dilemmas, as you pointed out there. I tend to be, though, a moral absolutist. I think things are certainly black and white, in so much as that they, how do I put this? I think they tend to have a correct and definitive answer. But I think there can be sort of a perception of grayity, to make up a word, that kind of results from outside sources putting you in a situation that is not otherwise ideal, which is in a way a contradiction to what I just said. It's like you're a moral absolutist, but at the same time you can have a room for gray area because people put you in weird situations, and therefore you might have two bad choices and all that. And you know, while I don't know if I'm necessarily explaining it to the best of my ability, I would say that if that sounds like a contradiction to some, it kind of sounds like a contradiction to me, if I'm being honest. I think it's in, which kind of goes to your point of it being complicated, right? But to lay out just the idea of my theories, I think that morality is essentially, first off, I think it's a set of facts. I think that it's, factually wrong to murder, to rape, to pillage, to steal, so on and so forth. I think that these morals are absolute. I think they're objective. I think they are grounded in a creator deity. And I think that the way that we tend to understand them, while there is a sense in which it's intuitive, which the Bible describes as laws written on our hearts, and I think sometimes that will manifest itself in the form of empathy, which will be an interesting thing for us to discuss. I also do think that it is most clearly articulated to us by way of divine commands. And so I tend to refer to myself as a divine command theorist. Divine command theory, I think, for some people is a little bit of an uncomfortable topic because it kind of opens the door for a potential that God is arbitrary. I think I have answers for that, but nevertheless, I just will say I understand the criticism and leave it there for now. To me, morality, if it is not objective and grounded in something, I won't say necessarily grounded in God because we'll get there, but grounded at least in something that is real, that is concrete, it essentially doesn't mean a whole lot of anything. And the reason I say that is because if you have, a situation where it's either a collection of, some people will say it's just a matter of your opinion. Like David Silverman has said, I am the ultimate arbiter of what is wrong and not wrong for me. That, of course, just boils it down to almost the same thing as whether or not I like Fruity Pebbles. And whether or not I like Fruity Pebbles is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. So it makes it, I think, way too subjective. Other people tend to say, well, what if it's a society? It's a collection, social contract theory. It's a collection of things which we've all collectively agreed on. That doesn't seem to work to me because then you have societies which have wildly different opinions, and basically whichever one wins is the one that has the dominant morality, and whichever one has the dominant morality is the only one that gets close to a quote unquote true morality. So you essentially just kind of run into might makes right. And then even when, you have people who tend to try and ground them in some other things like a evolutionary theory or something with empathy or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, I can be empathetic for the wrong person. I can easily make an argument that says we are better evolved by way of we lead to a more progressive, better evolved society by way of eugenics and things like that, and all these other things. And so that's a very long roundabout way for me to say I tend to see morality as objective, absolute, matter of fact, the same way any other fact is a matter of fact, and grounded in something that has to be outside of human beings. And I would argue that I think a God is the best explanation for that. So hopefully you guys followed that. That's where we're going to be starting the conversation with us. But I'll go ahead and pass to you if you want to challenge me on anything here first, and just as a way to get the conversation going.
No, I don't want to challenge anything. No, I'm joking. Look, first off, let's talk about sort of absolute morals, because to me, and maybe that's just sort of how I think of absolute morality. It's morality that doesn't change at all. It is set in stone, changes not from the start to the finish of time. It is absolutely true. So, I would assume you're a moral realist, and that appears to be the case. But when you're talking about absolute morals, I find it hard to say why morals would have changed from the Old Testament to the New if they're absolute. There would have been no change from the laws outlined in the Old Testament if that is the case. So I'm wondering if that's the sense that you mean absolute, or whether you're sort of using it in a different context, like maybe a universal, moral universals is maybe what you're referring to.
So I would say, now, to be clear, absolutism, objectivism, and universalism are related, but not necessarily the same. I kind of would agree with all three, but nevertheless, each individual term has to be used on its own. So that would be the first thing I just would want to make clear. The second thing I would say is, while I do tend to be rather deontological, I don't think that changes necessarily the ethic of it, itself, as much as it would the individual's, how would you say this? The requirement to respond, I guess, right? But then those two qualifications aside, I'd push back on the idea that morals do change. I think morals have what we in Christian circles will call like a fulfillment, right? So, like, as an example, there's the whole Passover thing. You got to have a Passover lamb and all that kind of stuff. Well, the traditional position for Christians, and especially Reformed Christians, so Protestant Reformed like myself, is that the Passover law itself is not done away with or changed in some sense. It's like it's brought to a fulfillment. So, which I guess, you have to define change there even, right? So it's not changed in the sense that it is changed to a different thing. It is changed in the same way that an acorn changes into an oak tree, right? It has now come to its full bloom kind of thing. Before the cross, Passover is a way to look forward to Jesus. After the cross, Jesus is taken as the literal Passover sacrifice. And so I still have one of those. It's just not the lamb meant to represent what is to come. It's the Christ who is what is to come, right? That outside of those things like fulfillments, I tend to think that Old Testament ethics still apply. And so, when people talk about Old Testament laws changing, I think that, to be honest with you, that has a lot to do with modern society being relatively queasy with some of the stuff that happened in the ancient world. I'll admit I'm sometimes queasy with things that happen in the ancient world. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean that it's changed per se. I'll give a perfect example, one that's highly controversial. I don't think there is necessarily something evil about slavery. I think slavery is most often done in an evil way. But I think, in theory,
Really,
I would affirm that. I think that. So, like, for example, what we did here in America, I think that is evil, but I don't think it was necessarily the fact that it was slavery. I would say that it's the fact that it was racially based, the fact that the people who were enslaved were abused, things like that. But as far as slavery in and of itself, I don't think it's necessarily morally wrong. Perhaps it's not ideal in a society. Perhaps there are ways which are better to go about, whatever sort of a labor thing you're going on. Capitalism, I think, works very well. But evil, I don't know if I can say that, because if somebody says, well, they don't have human rights, so therefore it's evil. Well, what if you had a slavery system that accounted for human rights, which I think the Bible actually does? Well, now all of a sudden, what actually has made it evil? Is it, if it's just the concept that owning somebody is evil, and I tend to have questions with things like contracts and all the, like, Colin Kaepernick gets memed all the time for the NFL draft system is kind of modern slavery. But in a way, he's kind of right. It's not brutal. They still have rights that are accounted for. But yeah, you enter a draft portal. The team drafts you. They have your rights. You cannot play football outside of them. You cannot do certain things that violate the contract. And if you do, you're out of the league, right? So there is a sense in which athletes are owned by the team. And there's even people who, noticing that, think that it's a problem. I don't. So that's a very long-winded way of me saying I would actually disagree with the idea that these morals do change. I think that there are things which change about society, but I don't think the moral absolutes necessarily do.
So do you think that all of the slaves in the antebellum South that you were talking about, do you think they all signed a contract?
No. I think that slavery was a uniquely bad version of slavery, even compared to other bad versions of slavery. Like, if you were to compare the Roman version of slavery to our antebellum South, and the Romans were not particularly great to their slaves, but even that comparison, antebellum slavery was particularly grotesque.
Right.
But I don't think
I'm sure there were masters in the antebellum that didn't treat their slaves bad, treated them quite well, and were nice to them. Would you consider that moral if they were nice to their slaves?
I think if they treated their slaves with, with a level of human dignity, with giving them human rights,
Right.
I wouldn't
Well, slaves
necessarily
did
think.
have rights. Like, for instance, just as one example, New Amsterdam, which became New York, if you're unfamiliar with the way that
Right.
went after the Dutch left, kind of thing. The slaves did have rights. They had right to marry. They had certain rights under the Dutch. I would still consider slavery as being highly immoral, regardless of the amount of rights that you give your slaves. Right,
Yeah,
like the
and I
whole
would tend to disagree with
the,
that. I
the
think that if we had a
right.
system where, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I want to do is sort of ask you, well, if someone came and took you and then you were sold to somebody else, and you did not have, like you didn't agree to it, it was non-consensual, you'd rather be back in America doing whatever, would you say that that slavery is moral if you were the one being owned by somebody else?
Yeah, so that particular qualifier of it, the kidnapping element, I'd say no. And actually, the biblical version is similar, right? They say man stealing, as they call it, but it's essentially the same thing. You kidnap people in
Well,
order.
that was in regards to something else entirely. It says quite specifically you can buy your slaves from the nations around you or from the foreigners living in your midst. It says that specifically. So
Yeah.
the question is the person that buys the slave, like you're owned by somebody, you're in another country, you're owned by somebody. They didn't kidnap you, they just bought you from the person that did. Would that still be moral if you were the one enslaved there without a choice? Would that person holding you against your will and making you work against your will, is that still a moral thing to do?
So in the specific scenario you've given, I think it would be a little bit complicated, certainly, which of course it happened. So it's not to say that it's,
Sure,
overly
absolutely
unique.
did. And
Um,
just say they're really nice to you. You know, they're really nice to you. They give you lots of food. They give you a shelter, but they don't allow you to go back to America. They don't allow you to go back to your life. They say, hey, you've got to work for us and spend the rest of your life here. Is that moral?
I would say the immorality in that situation, I think, is placed on the person who has forced you into a non-consensual slavery. So my understanding of biblical slavery is there is essentially three ways in which a person becomes enslaved. They either have themselves consented, typically because of debt, they're criminals,
Yes.
or they're POWs, essentially. Which for a very long time, POWs, that was just what you did. You put them to work. Prisons are relatively new, at least the way in which we understand prisons. Obviously, dungeons and things which certainly resemble prisons
Well,
have
there's a
existed for
couple of
quite some
other
time.
ways actually. There's sort of two other ways. They've already been slaves and they're bought from the nations around Israel or from the people who came to Israel with slaves. You could buy them from people. Or a slave that you own has a child and that child is your property.
So yeah, I think that would probably be fair. We'll add those actually. I think you're probably right about that. That those are systems in which it could
Yeah.
end up happening. Now, so in those given situations, the first thing I would say is if the person who initially sold you has acquired, we'll say, quote unquote, rights to you through some illegitimate means, I would say the immorality is on them, not on you. Um, at that point, you're essentially only, in other words, it's like you're only guilty for the things which you did. You're not guilty if that person kidnapped them and they sold them into your system, which is now different. I think that we're talking about something that is immoral on them, not necessarily immoral on you. I also think that there is sort of outs that are, sort of placed in the Bible for situations like this. In the case of a Hebrew, the out is very obvious. You can only be a slave for a maximum of
Yeah.
7 years unless you yourself decide you want to be
Yeah,
much longer,
Jubilee. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
In the
Absolutely.
case of a foreigner, they are not afforded the 7-year right, but I would
Mhm.
argue that the Jubilee right still applies to them because it's supposed to apply to all people in
Possibly.
the land. There are some who would disagree with me on that, of course, but assuming that I was right about that, which of course we could argue about whether or not I am in a moment, but assuming I'm right about that, if one were to have a slave and the Jubilee was sounded, that slave will ultimately end up going free. And of course, that should be happening after every 49 years. So it's not technically every 50 years, it's in the 50th year. But regardless, so I think there are ways in which the Bible tries to plan for those eventualities. Hey, what if you have somebody who, through no consent of their own, they're not prisoners of war or anything like that, but they were sold to you by somebody who has an unjust means of acquiring them, or they were born into this household before you actually, and therefore didn't have any consent. They're born to a slave, in other words. And I think the Bible tries to account for those situations by saying, okay, well, if they're a Hebrew, they have certain citizens' rights. If they're a non-citizen, in other words, a foreigner, even then we are still going to create an out so that they can eventually return back to their land. And of course, that'll be in the form of the Jubilee happening once every 50 years. So, yeah, I know. I guess if I add to that, it would just be muddying the water. So I would just kind of leave it there. And if you had another question on that,
okay. Well, it's sort of, it's interesting to think that like, and I'm just surprised that you would be fine with sort of saying, hey, the person holding me isn't responsible. The person who took me is immoral, but the person who I now work for and have to work for possibly up to 50 years of my life, they're fine. From my point of view, I can say, hey, I'm concerned with the flourishing of humans and human societies. And we know that slavery is bad for societies, not only for the people being enslaved, it's actually bad for the people doing the enslaving, because when you have this element of free labor, you destroy the lower class, and then that in turn destroys the middle class. It becomes a nation of sort of people in charge and slaves. We know that these systems are terrible, which is why they've been abolished everywhere. Not to mention the degradation to individual humans themselves, which I have a concern with as well. So I can sort of say, hey, all slavery is immoral. The entire institution's immoral. And I have no problem with that whatsoever. I don't have to uphold any kind of biblical thing, and I don't have to imagine myself. And I know, just using empathy, that if I was held by somebody, and even if they're a nice person and said, hey, you can't go back to your family, you've got to stay in my country and work for me for up to 50 years, sort of, easily maybe 3/4 of my life, I would say that is deeply immoral. I can certainly say that. I think that's a gross travesty that the person would uphold that institution. And this is the reason why we sort of ban slavery. The idea that it just because you treat that person well, then you get to use them in some way to or own rights to them, I think is an absolute travesty. And like I said, it's not even good for the slave owners, because in the end, that will end up devaluing the lower class and therefore sort of destroy entire economies. I think partially that's why the Roman Empire collapsed. They had too many slaves. And what happened, at least partially, there were a whole bunch of reasons why that happened. But when you start to get, the middle class, they're producing things, they're working things. Why would you hire people if you have access to slaves?
Yeah, and so there's a couple interesting things there, I think. The first one is, and this is not even necessarily a disagreement with the idea that it's not beneficial in economies, but ultimately it's a separate question, I think. So like just to give a brief example, I don't think there's anything immoral about having a king. I happen to think republics work better. You know what I mean? But that's not an immorality. If anything, it's something that is perhaps not prudent, but it's not necessarily evil or wrong per se, right? Now, that being said, of course, that doesn't address any of the things you brought up as far as why this might actually be wrong. So setting that one to the side for a moment, I think, first and foremost, I think at the time, and I want to be clear, this is not a change in the morals itself. It's a change in the way the societies have been run. It probably was not true that it was necessarily wrong or not wrong, unbeneficial, for each of the parties involved. And as an example of that, one of the ways in which people end up falling into slavery, at least biblically speaking, is of course by debt, right? Well, in the modern day, we don't enslave you or anything like that will just potentially throw you into prison or foreclose on your house or a whole bunch of other things that can be particularly egregious. Now, because of the capitalistic way in which our society functions, that actually is more economically beneficial than to enslave you, right? Or to be more technically accurate, to allow you the possibility to sell yourself as a means of getting out of debt. Because as you said, we have a certain system where people need to pick strawberries, people need to go out and work at McDonald's and other sorts of low wage jobs. And if you can just have free labor doing that, then obviously that's not particularly beneficial. But again, that's a separate question. And the moral element of it, it's not really like anything improves per se. You're still essentially railroaded as a result of having debt. In one instance, your railroading happens as a result of the fact that you either lose everything or go into this slavery system. And on the other end, you either pay everything off somehow or you lose everything. You know what I mean? And or go to prison or something like that. So it's like when we're dealing with these kinds of situations, the alternative doesn't seem to be a whole lot better to me. And if we're talking about this from a point of view of like empathy or something like that, it's like, okay, maybe it's more beneficial from a societal economic standpoint, but from a moral standpoint, I don't see how putting somebody in prison is all that better than putting somebody in a system of slavery, provided both are accounting for the same things. For example, in the prison system, we would say, okay, yeah, but in prisons, we do want to make sure that people are properly fed, properly clothed, they're not being abused, whether that's physically or sexually or emotionally, so on and so forth. And I'd say, yeah, and I think the same should be true in a slave system. Prisons aren't necessarily race-based. Obviously, a certain society may have problems with race, but in and of itself, a system's not supposed. Yeah, agreed. I think the same thing should be true in a slave system, and so on and so forth, right? So when you look at the ways in which people can become slaves, biblically speaking, and compare that to the ways in which people become prisoners or in which people go into debt or what we do with POWs, it's hard for me to say from an ethical standpoint anything has improved or gotten worse. It seems to me like it's basically the same. The difference being from an economic and societal standpoint, things have changed, which is not necessarily morality. It's more like the way you structure your government, right? Or it's society, I guess, not necessarily government. Government has to do with it, but it's not.
Well, I'm kind of confused, CJ, because as far as I knew, I mean, definitely in Australia where I am, you can't go to prison just for debt. It's not you can't do that. We don't imprison people for having debts. It doesn't happen. As far as I knew in the US, people aren't imprisoned either just for having debts. I think that if they ignore it and stuff like that, if they just basically say I don't care, they can sort of be in prison for contempt of court, but that's different. I think you're sort of conflating the two things. And I see why, right? Because in the US, there is this thing of you send people to prison, they do work in the prison to make a very small pittance kind of thing as part of these work programs kind of stuff. And it seems for all intents and purposes as debt slavery. Now, I don't think they're moral either. I think that making profit off of people that are in the penal system is immoral as well. It isn't good for societies for exactly the same reasons as I pointed out. It's bad to have slaves because how's lower class people going to get work? All the same reasons. So I don't think that's moral either. But I think that you're sort of making a conflation of somebody committing a crime and being imprisoned for it as somebody that's done really nothing wrong or just owes money. It's a crime that involves just capital and being sort of made property of somebody else for that. Because the government, even though they imprison people, the people are still not their property, right? Nobody considers the prisoners that the state has their property. Right, they don't own them. They're basically incarcerated them because they have to keep them from society, and they've got a responsibility to the rest of society to make sure they're not doing anything to it, kind of thing. Like they've got this responsibility, but the state doesn't claim to own them. Like, you still can't take a prisoner and have a guard beat him senseless, or withhold food from him, or do any of these other things that would be above the sort of the power that we've given the state to deal with these people. So I don't think it's a very fair distinction, because in one case you're sort of saying, hey, somebody has bought somebody else, they paid for them, and then that becomes your property that you own, like a car or something like that. Whereas in the other case, somebody has violated the law, and the state, in order to protect society from this individual, has laid down a sentence in order to incarcerate them to enforce that law. And again, I'll just reiterate, I'm all for work programs to help people rehabilitate. I'm all for rehabilitative justice. But these programs that basically have prisoners work to make a company profit is highly immoral to me. They shouldn't be treating them like debt slaves. But I don't think you're right. I don't think people are thrown into prison because of debt. Last I heard that happening was like England in the sort of Victorian era kind of thing. We kind of stopped doing that.
Well, and I think so. Technically, I guess I should have been clearer with my words, because I think the foreclosures and losing everything and that can very often happen with debt. But I think in order to be thrown in prison with debt, there is some unique circumstances, like it's debt to the government, like taxes, or you're like court ordered, like child support or something like that. So that would definitely be on me for not speaking clearly.
Well, I think tax fraud, sure. I'm not
I think
sure.
If you refuse to pay taxes, though, too, or refuse to pay child support, those things, if I remember correctly, I could totally be wrong about this, to be clear, but I think those things do ultimately result in a jail time sentence.
Well, what it is the court hands down the decision, like, you've got to pay this there. If you don't, you're in contempt of court. It's actually contempt of the court that they're being punished for, not paying in general. It's basically when you ignore or flagrantly violate the court handing down a decision, you're in contempt of it. So I think, like, I get what you're saying, that, hey, you've gotten into debt, but it is the rebellion against the determination of the court that you're being jailed for, not the fact that you owe money.
Well, and so this will actually kind of get me to the point I was kind of saying, where you say, jails don't own people. In both the situation you just said and the situation with the jails own people, I almost there's a part of me which chuckles a little bit and says, well, yeah, technically I think that's true, but for all intents and purposes, I think a prisoner is owned by the state. In fact, they're even referred to as wards of the state. As far as not de facto, de jure, right? Like in word, are they actually owned?
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Like at face is de jure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, yeah, I guess no, they're not making that claim, but they might as well be. All of the same thing, and some of the other peripheral things, and I refer to them as peripheral. You may not think of them as that, but it's like the beatings and stuff like that. I don't think that necessarily is a part of a system of slavery per se. It can be. It very often has been throughout history. But not only could I easily conceive of, but I think one is even found in the Bible, where we would say, you can have a system where people's economic rights are owned by other individuals, but you still are not allowed to treat them in certain ways that wouldn't be the same for necessarily anybody else, right? So, like, for example, there's the famous gouge the eye, chip the tooth verse in the Bible, as far as if you beat a slave such that you gouge his eye, chip his tooth, he goes free, right? Well, a lot of people understand that to be not literal. It's more of a euphemism to say if you cause cosmetic damage to somebody, then they can probably go free. As a source for this, I would even go with somebody unbiased, like Dr. Josh Bowen has said this before, where he said, well, it's not literally, okay, I can rip his ear off, but I can't gouge his eye or chip his tooth kind of thing. It's more like okay, if a corporal punishment leads to a sense of, and by the way, he would fundamentally disagree with the position I'm saying right now as far as slavery not necessarily being evil.
Correct.
Which is why I use him as a source, because I think it'd be the fact that a concession is made by somebody on that side, I think is relevant, right? But digression on that. It's a euphemism, at least a lot of people have suggested, for not causing cosmetic damage to somebody, right? And so we see there a system of slavery in which any sort of corporal punishment that is found in, is given to that slave is the same that you might see from parent to child, or from somebody who is being punished for a crime, or you know what I mean? It's like this. The society at large is not treating slaves differently than they're treating everybody else when it comes to corporal punishment. We don't have corporal punishment, of course, at all today in the modern day. At least I don't think we do.
And you would think that's immoral, that we should have corporal punishment? Is that what you're saying? Because the Bible sort of says that if you beat your slave and they don't die within a day or two, then the master is not to be punished because they are your property, or they are your money, I think is the more accurate translation of that.
Yeah, and and I think that is to be added on to what we've already seen, right? So that's one of the things. So you can't kill them, you can't beat them to the extent that they are bedridden.
You can't do permanent harm, yes, but you can inflict some horrible amounts of pain and suffering on them as long as they don't die within a day or two. That's fine.
Well, or even remember, one of the things that they say is even if they are bedridden for a day or two, that is also said to be an illegal thing, right? So essentially, what that
no, it doesn't say that's illegal. It says that the master's not to be punished if they recover within a day or two.
No, yes, but the point I was making there is to say if they were not dead, but also were not to recover, like say if I broke your leg or something like that, right? And you'll recover eventually, depending on what bone you break, I guess. You'll recover eventually, but not in that short period of time. That would also be, okay, well, then they're free. Something like the whippings we did in the United States of America, where people would be essentially incapacitated for multiple days because of the beatings they withstand from a scourging, would be also illegal, right? So you have a system where a limited amount of corporal punishment is certainly legal, but it's the same amount of corporal punishment that you would see probably found in other areas of society. In other words, the human rights as far as beating somebody.
I don't think so. I don't think you'd find that in modern society. I don't think you'd find, me able to have somebody serving me in my home, and if they brought me a plate of food at the wrong temperature, I could give them a backhand. I don't think we're seeing that in our societies. I don't think we're seeing mothers in our societies, if the child sort of plays up and does something they ask them not to, that they give them a good backhand with the ring finger kind of thing. I mean, CJ, you're really talking about a horrific society here, where you can be owned by somebody, and every few days, if I decide to, I can take with you to, I could take a rod to you, just a stick, give you a few whacks and shove you into a corner, let you know who's boss here, and then that's perfectly fine. I think that would be horrific for you. Even if you are knocked down a couple of days. Imagine I beat you hard enough that you're down a day, right? Not even a couple, just a day, right? That is still a horrific amount of damage done to somebody. And I just say, hey, that's the law. I get to walk away. It's not my problem. Not my problem. But, I'm allowed to do that. I don't think that's a society I want to live in. And I don't think it's a society you want to live in either. Certainly not if you're the person on the receiving end of that beating.
Well, so let me kind of offer first off, I would say I don't think corporal punishment is quite as rare as we might want to believe. I mean, spanking is certainly legal, and spanking with a belt even is certainly legal. Maybe not in Australia. I guess I don't know the laws.
No, definitely not. No. And I mean, we're not even really talking about legal. We're talking about what's moral here.
And that's, we'll rephrase that, right? Because I think it probably is legal in America. I mean, I was spanked as a child, so it better be legal in America. But of course, whether or not it's legal doesn't necessarily mean it's moral, right? So In fact, I believe swattings in school are still legal in America in like 12, 18, something like that, different states, less than half, but certainly a large amount. But then, of course, whether or not it's moral, I mean, I don't know. I don't really take the position that corporal punishment is necessarily immoral. And it seems to me like when we talk about the other kinds of things that happen, like as an example, if I were to, I don't know, let me think of something. There's an open bar at my work. If I were to get drunk on the job, right, I'd get fired, and then I'd also have on the sort of record, hey, you got to put down your references. I put down my reference. They call my former boss. Yeah, he got drunk on the job, right? So not only do I get fired, but I have that following me around to such an extent that a good job is going to be very difficult to get. The domino effect from that is rather terrible, right? You lose your job. You're not able to take care of yourself because you don't have the money and the income, right? You do all these other kinds of things, right? So you're put in a very difficult position economically, one that it's pretty hard to get out of, actually, at least in the immediate aftermath, which that can lead to losing your house. That can lead to potentially negative ramifications as far as your ability to pay medical bills, all that.
Definitely have consequences, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So now, if you were to ask me the question, okay, would you rather go through all of that, or would you rather get swatted with a belt? I got to be honest with you personally. I mean, the belt's at least done with quickly. I don't have these long-reaching ramifications. You just get the swat and you move on. Now, that to each their own, I guess, right? As far as
hold on a sec, CJ. It's completely sort of unrealistic what you're talking about, because what you're talking about is the various consequences that come from your actions, right? You're not talking about a punishment, because it's not that all of these things happen to punish you for getting drunk on the job. The reason why you can't find another job is because employers are looking for reliable employees that don't get drunk on the job. It's not like they're punishing you. It's just that is the requirements of employers. Like, this is just how your decisions affect your life. It's not like the employees are getting together and saying, hey, let's punish the people that get drunk on the job. Let's not hire them, even though we would have if they, if we didn't decide this. No, it's not what's happening here, right? So with your scenario, you would get hit and you still wouldn't be able to find a job, because getting hit doesn't change any of the societal expectations about sober employees. So I think you're sort of framing this very, very strangely. And I would say, hey, we shouldn't hit people who get drunk on the job because their consequences are bad enough. And those consequences aren't a punitive thing. They're not people deciding to punish people with a substance addiction or people that have done something wrong. It is just the way that society responds to it, through not a punitive way, but what they require out of their employees. So I really think that you're sort of equivocating a punishment to just the extraneous consequences of your decisions in life. What we're talking about is punitive stuff here. Like, how do we punish these people? What actions do we take against them? And I don't think corporal punishment is even a particularly effective one. I really don't think so. I think that if somebody is drunk on the job, what will serve them a lot better is going to be, alcohol rehabilitation, addiction therapy and things like that, rather than any kind of punitive corporal punishment for it. I don't even know how that would make things better.
Let me be clear as far as what I'm saying. What I'm comparing is the firing and subsequent writing that comes from that, which is, this is why this person got fired. Then, of course, you have all the consequences that come from that, which you're right, are not part of the punishment. They're just consequences of it, right?
Sure.
Versus, instead of the firing, a corporal punishment, right? And what I'm saying is the consequences of the one seem to me to be immediately over versus the consequences of the other, which seem to take a very long period of time for me. So like on the surface, you're like, okay, well, one person got physically harmed and the other person got financially harmed, and then you just move on. But that's really not it, because on the surface, there are a lot of consequences. The consequences of the one are, as I hurt for 24 hours, and the consequences of the other are that I am essentially societally damaged for a long period of time. You know what I mean? Or you can even do this with like another thing with like criminals. Is it worse for somebody who, and I don't necessarily agree with the drug war, but that's not what I'm getting at here. But let's say somebody gets caught with drugs. Is it worse for them to be incarcerated for a year or something like that, or to have something that is a relatively minor corporal beating? I mean, I find it difficult from a purely empathetic point of view to justify the one over the other. And I'm not necessarily saying one is wrong and the other is not. I'm just saying, like, it doesn't seem to me like one is more immediately jarring. And I think that's why we dislike it. Whereas the other one is not immediately jarring, but its consequences are equally negative on the person who did it.
Well, I think you're sort of making a category error. I'm not sure why you think that firing is necessarily a punitive thing. So a lot of people misunderstand corporations and the reason why they do fire people. It is because they are running a business model, and that person is going to harm that model, the goal that they're getting to. It isn't necessarily a punitive thing. It's there to protect the corporate interest, because what corporations do is protect the corporate interest. That's what they're all about. It's what they're focused on. And that in turn is because they're ultimately motivated by making profit. That's essentially what they're after. That is their number one. It's really their only goal of the corporate entity, is to make profit and return for their shareholders. That's it. So the firing that you're sort of saying is it's not so much even a punishment for what they've done. It is the company taking steps to maximize that profit in the long run, because having an employee that's a danger, being drunk on the job, is not going to do that. It's going to be directly antithetical to that goal. So I think you're making a big category error with saying, hey, the punishing somebody for what they're doing by some kind of physical harm is in the same category as a company sort of taking steps to eliminate a potentially risky employee for their bottom line. It's not even in the same ballpark. I'm not even sure how we came to here, but I guess from my moral point of view, corporal punishment is never moral, because it never actually helps with your goal. It never actually helps to get to where you're going. Because just say you're in a company and you're caught drinking on the job. The company is not going to beat you and let you get back to work. And the reason why is because beating you is probably going to make you drink more, not less, right? This isn't a case of, oh, if you beat them, that's the last you'll see of that behavior. That is not how that works. And we know that physical violence doesn't stop people doing what they're doing. It's providing them with a way to take alternative behavior that's more constructive and healthy, that stops them from doing these behaviors. So this idea that you can sort of lay down violence to make people do things is such an archaic idea. That is not how we run corporations. It's not how we run companies, mostly because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you've ever met somebody who's alcoholic, threatening them with all kinds of things is not going to work. Hitting them is not going to work. What does work is therapy and AA and having real solutions that are based in their psychological needs, instead of just thrusting harm upon them. I'm not saying that the consequences for drinking on the job aren't harmful. Sure they are, but they're not designed to punish somebody trying to get them to change their behavior, which is what corporal punishment is supposed to do and fails to do. And that's why I consider it immoral. Because when you're talking about having flourishing humans and flourishing human society, and that's my goal, right, for humanity to flourish, beating people and it ultimately not changing their behavior and not working, in fact, making them even more broken human beings because they've been on the receiving end of physical violence. I don't see that as a way to accomplish flourishing humans and flourishing human beings. I see that as making a situation worse. And that's why I consider it grossly immoral, because it does not get it does not get me to my goal. Um, and so, I don't need to think about it more than that. I don't have to justify it in the way that you're trying to justify it. I can just say, hey, that's immoral because it is directly antithetical to what I want to achieve. That's it. That's all I need to know.
Well, and I think my problem here and the way I've been approaching this so far is because I haven't been grounding necessarily why I think it's moral. I've been kind of, in a sense, critiquing the idea that it's not, that it's somehow less beneficial or more beneficial, right? Because it seems like that is a fundamental part of what you would affirm, right? As far as, human flourishing and stuff like that. In other words, the benefit. And I guess my point is just, I don't see from a beneficiary standpoint a difference. To me, it doesn't seem like prison systems or firings or the debt system that we currently have, or et cetera. It doesn't seem like that's a significant improvement on the systems that we see in the ancient day of corporal punishment, or what I would say is a usually based in consent slavery that we find in the Bible, right? Like it seems to me like, as far as the results, you're still kind of screwed if you're in that position. And in one, you could even say you're screwed in a more long-term way, right? So immediate but incredibly painful punishment versus not so painful, not so jarring immediately, but long-term consequences. I guess I'm struggling to see how one is truly more beneficial than the other, is my point.
Well,
Perhaps
the thing is that, perhaps I could clarify. So the only way that would sort of apply to me is if I thought that the debt system in America is moral, right? That's the only way that argument would apply to me.
That's fair.
Or that the prison system is moral, right? Which I don't think they are. I think that the debt system, the way that it handles it, it is deeply immoral because of the harm it does to humans, and it's not even good for human society, because you do get these instances of bankruptcy. You do get these people who aren't thrown a lifeline and then aren't productive members of society anymore. I think it is deeply immoral because it doesn't get you to, again, human flourishing and the flourishing of human societies. I think that other countries, you can sort of look maybe to Scandinavia and the way that they set up, sort of a universal basic income for their citizens. And, so if they are in debt, they can at least have a pathway out of it, kind of thing. So I think some of these systems can work a lot better. I don't know what the most moral would be, because, I think that I don't know enough about finance, but I do know that the outcomes that some of these countries produces are way beyond what the outcomes of, our two countries may produce. So it might be worth looking to what they're implementing and say, hey, the debt system is immoral. The prison system, especially the working of prisoners in for almost nothing in order to make another company money, is deeply immoral and flawed. I would absolutely agree with that. The sort of firing somebody and leaving them to the street because they drank on the job without providing them the means to change their life, grow as a person, and be a productive member of society again, like through providing things like substance rehabilitation and therapy and things like that, is deeply immoral. So sort of this leveraging and saying, hey, these two things, why does it need to be one of these two things? Why can't we find a way where we are saying, hey, people do make mistakes, people get into debt, people do get make mistakes like drinking on the job, especially with substance addiction. I'm very, very compassionate about that. But there should be a path where they can work their way out of it and become an upstanding and valuable member of society. I don't think it's one or the other. So I kind of want to push back against the idea of, because I think these systems are immoral, I must accept the current ones the United States has. No, I don't. I think they're immoral as well.
That is definitely a perfectly fair response. My problem with it is that while those are the examples I'm looking at currently, The greater point I'm making, I think, is one that would still apply, which is I don't see where there is a benefit per se. I think to an extent, every situation has pitfalls that aren't great. In fact, they're not even say again.
A benefit of what? Sorry, I'm not sure where the benefit.
Yeah, sorry. Let me be clear on what I'm saying there. So I think if we were to look at any system that's been used or any hypothetical system, I don't see how there isn't either A, some very serious and definitely not beneficial consequences for the party that committed the wrong, or B, how would I put this? A system which can arguably reward them for doing what they do or punish other people for doing what they do. I don't want to get into a whole thing about economics, but I would argue Scandinavian countries, there's a lot of benefit from a UBI. I also definitely enjoy having a significant amount of my income to spend on what I would like or to have a better life for myself, right? I would find it deeply immoral if I had to give up, I'm not exactly sure what the rates are there, but some exuberant amount of my income because somebody down the street from me has a responsibility problem, right? Whereas, in other words, it's like, yeah, sure, we've now eliminated the potential pitfalls for them, but we've done so by creating pitfalls for me, right? Now, I would not go as far as to claim that means the Scandinavian system is somehow evil and immoral and they need to toss it all out or anything like that. My only point in saying this is that it doesn't seem to me like any system that one can come up with is significantly improved. Like that, there's always either a very detrimental consequence to the party that committed the wrong act, or there's a detrimental consequence to other people in order to avoid that consequence for the person who committed the wrong act. And all of this is meant to be, I'm not sure if I articulated it in the best way, so I do apologize. But all of this is meant to be somewhat of an internal critique, right? Because from my own system, it doesn't necessarily matter if something is beneficial or not. Like, for example, I think that a crime being punished is in and of itself a moral good. It's not meant to rehabilitate. If it does, that's great. No problem with that. I like rehabilitation. If it prevents the crime, that's great. I very much like preventative measures. But the point of punishing you is to punish you on my system. You did something wrong. Wrong acts are deserving of negative consequences, right? I would assume, based on what we've talked about so far, that is not an intuition you would share or a position you would share. I guess it's not necessarily.
No, not at all. I don't believe in punitive penal systems, mostly because they don't work very well. That's the thing. Like, sort of punishing people doesn't seem to prevent other people from doing the same crimes. It doesn't seem to sort of have a sort of, you know, I'm completely blanking on the word. But it also all it does is encourage people to do the crime more, paradoxically enough. I think that sort of rehabilitative crime is better. Just looking up, say, Finland, for instance, yes, the tax rate is higher. It's 31.1. OECD counts the average as 24.6. So it is definitely higher. I will absolutely concede that. However, I would be happier paying more tax to live in a place where people are committing less crimes and there's less people drinking on the job and there's less people doing this kind of stuff. I would be happier doing that. So maybe it is that our priorities are different. Yours is more self-focused. You want more for yourself. I would be happier living in a country which has a better society, because that, to me, is worth so much more than just a little bit more money. I think that having a better society and sort of, it's kind of like you've got really two options. You can get a bigger slice of the pie, but if you make the pie bigger, if you make society better and more productive, right, you actually will get a bigger pie for everyone. We'll actually get a bigger life. This is kind of how we look at sort of game theory, right? If we work together, we can make the pie bigger, and then our individual slice is going to be bigger as well. So it's how we look at these things as, well, this part's mine, as opposed to, hey, let's make everything better, and then my part's going to be better as well. So I think sort of our ways of looking at it are completely different. But so, like I said, I mean, human well-being, both individually and societally, are really what I'm after, and that's my goal. So it isn't necessarily my financial stability. My financial stability is important because that's part of my well-being, and I am a human, so human well-being has to be covered under that, sure. But you know, I think that societal well-being is important as well. And I kind of do agree with John Rawls and the Veil of Ignorance. I think that you should sort of have a society where you would feel treated equally as any member of that society. So I can use empathy to say, hey, what would my life be like if I were an alcoholic, right? So if I was in their position and made a mistake by drinking on the job because I was an alcoholic, I would like people to have, you know, sure, be angry at me, punish me, I get that, but at least have some way that I can change and better myself. And that's one of the things that I think is important for people, and that is the concept of self-actualization. In psychology, it's basically the ability to make the most of yourself, the ability to be who you want to be, and what that actually means. Live up to your potential, I guess, would be a way to describe it. So I think that it's important as a human right to have the right for self-actualization, to have the opportunity to live up to your potential, is very, very important. And I think by sort of saying, hey, they did something wrong, down with them, they're going to be enslaved, or they're going to be beaten, or they're going to, that's taking away that ability to say, hey, I made a mistake, but now I want to sort of live up to my potential. I don't think people are sort of as base as you're making them out to be. I don't think because somebody does something like that necessarily. Do you think that person that drinks on the job is a bad person?
I don't. This is going to sound awfully cynical, but I don't really think there's such thing as a good person. Everybody is
Really?
deeply flawed, and unfortunately, some people are some people's flaws are a little bit more obvious than others. But
Really?
yeah, I tend to think that well, I just be very blunt with it. I tend to think that humans are, for the most part, pretty debased. We can create societies that, because of their, how much they flourish, tend to sort of mask our debased nature. But for the most part, I don't. Um, uh, if we lived 200 years ago, even, and that's not even a long time ago, it would be pretty weird for you to know somebody who hadn't either had their life taken unnecessarily, or been the person who's done that, right? It'd be pretty rare for
Yeah,
you
sure.
not to meet a woman who wasn't abused. It'd be pretty rare for you not to meet somebody who was racist, right? Society has improved, and so it's masked all of that stuff, such that now it's like it's really easy for me. And by the way, to be clear, I, like most other people, would think I could never, right? And insert X crime, I could never, right? I have the luxury of being able to think that, though, because I have grown up in a society where I've never felt the societal pull, or the cultural pull, or some sort of an economic pull, or whatever, to commit some sort of egregious crime. It's masked that part of my nature, in other words. But if I lived 200 years ago, How can I honestly say I would never hate a black person? I don't know that. You know what I mean? That's just my assumption because I live in a society that has taught me that all of that stuff is wrong, and it's sort of masked the potential inside of me to have to feel that way, right? But and this is a little bit different than what we're talking about right now. But I often ask people, so if you lived in Nazi Germany in 1930s, you'd be against the regime, right? Everybody says yes. And it's like, fun fact, statistically, that's just straight up not true. Statistically, right. The vast majority, unless you're going to make a claim that there's something ontologically different about Germans in the 1930s, which of course nobody believes because that would be racist. Statistically speaking, you are either a supporter of it or at least okay with it so that you could get by. Very few Germans actually spoke out. The ones who did, very brave. Good on them. I'm in no way insulting them, right? But it's just, it's so unlikely that you're that guy. You know what I mean? It's so unlikely that I'm that guy. I'm using the royal you. I'm not talking about you individually.
Yeah, no, I get you.
But
yeah, so here's the thing. Most of the people in Germany didn't know the worst excesses of what the Nazis were doing, right? There wasn't sort of this publicity campaign of, hey, we're going to sort of, take the Jews out and gas them. They didn't broadcast that around to the people. That wasn't what they were saying. So most of the worst excesses they didn't sort of tell people about, and they were kept very, very secret. A lot of the other things were propagandized, right? So they had to frame it in such a way as to appeal to people's nature. They had to say, hey, we are taking back the Reich because of these reasons, because we want the glorious, Germany should. It was basically, let's make Germany great again, because people were angry at the way that Germany had been treated after the First World War, right? So the way that they framed it was in such a way to appeal to people's sense of honor, of nationalism, of patriotism, and all of these other things. They didn't frame it as, hey, let's go out and slaughter people and kill them and be horrible and things like this. That's not how they framed it. So this idea that you wouldn't be against it, to even think in terms of how a German citizen thought in that time, angry about what had happened to, them after World War One. They were, in debt. Their country was put in debt because they had to make reparations because they lost World War One. Being angry about that, listening to all of the Nazi propaganda about how, the Jews were doing this, they were doing that. We've got no idea how we would think in that case because we're not part of that system, right? I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I would put it at that point though, that if the average German citizen knew exactly down to the minute details of how those people died in the gas chambers in Auschwitz and stuff, would they still have supported it?
Yeah, and there is certainly a lot of disagreement on that. I will grant that there are many historians who would say it wasn't quite as blatant as we might think. There are others, though, who have argued. In fact, one that he comes to mind off the top of my head because his arguments are actually found on the Wikipedia page about this very thing. And of course, being a history nerd and a Jew whose family came from Germany, I'm somewhat interested in this. Peter, I think his name is Longrich or something like that. He's argued that by 1943, it was very well known. It's just he calls it an open secret. Nobody talked about it, but everybody knew what was happening. And at least some of it they already did know. And you bring up, they were being mistreated and all that. One of the things that's very tough for us in the modern day to kind of come to terms with is the Germans had legitimate grievances. Beyond legitimate grievances. You think about the things we complain about in Australia and America collectively, and every other country for that matter. It wasn't even close to, economically destroyed, wrongly accused of being the sole cause of a war that they were not the sole cause of. I
agree with that.
Yeah. But that, to me, that actually kind of helps further my point because I have the luxury of having never lived in that. And so as a result, when somebody luckily I've never had anybody quite like that in America, and I doubt that you guys have in Australia either. But when a hypothetical somebody comes up and gets popular, well, I guess you have Kanye West, right? Kanye West is quite blatant with his racism. He's quite blatant with his fascism, right? And it's like, that guy's nuts. I would never vote for him. Hypothetically, though, if we're in the Great Depression and we're being, we have the Treaty of Versailles on us and all these other kinds of things, right? And he actually has solutions, which sucks to admit, but which worked, at least in the short term, which that's people in the short term, that's the thing that gets you, right? Would I not vote for that person? I would very much like to believe the answer is still yes, I would not vote for that person, right? But I don't actually know that. I have the luxury of being able to think that. And to me, that is kind of an illusion. You know what I mean? It's like, I have 2 dogs. They're wolves. Just biologically speaking, you take their DNA, you take the DNA of a gray wolf, you can see the differences, but they are wolves. They're Canis lupus scientifically. Canis lupus familiaris, technically, right?
Yes.
The fact that I raise them in a house where they're very much loved, and the fact that I groom them, and the fact that they play and burn off their energy, and the fact that I give them, a meal every day. In some dog breeds, of course, it would even be 2 because it just depends on how much your dog's eating and all that. That creates this illusion that it's not actually a wolf, but it is. It is a wolf. It is through and through a wolf. If stuff gets really crazy, that wolf is going to be for him and his pack and nobody else, right? He's real, which is, as it happens, I'm part of the pack. But nevertheless, he's good with my friends and my family and stuff like that who are not part of the pack. Stuff hits the fan, he no longer is. You know what I mean? Because he's a wolf. He can't do anything about it. He's a wolf. I think that it's the same thing that I feel about humankind. I think we live in a great society. I love the fact that we live in the modern society. I would consider myself to be blessed to live in this society where me and you are talking rather than potentially hiding from some government that wants to kill us both. Right. But I can't pretend like if I lived back then, I wouldn't be just as evil as all of those people, because statistically, I probably would, which leads me to believe that we are still the same species that, slaughtered the Aborigines and slaughtered the Native Americans and slaughtered the Jews and all that stuff. But we live in a society now that masks all that.
So CJ, let me look at that analogy, because it's beautiful, right? You've got obviously the wolf is bad kind of thing. Your sort of analogy for bad, very wild creature, very dangerous kind of thing, and the dog is the good part, right? The whole point is that what makes it good and bad is not the intrinsic state of the animal, right? It's not good or bad intrinsically. It's just that it's how it's raised. It's how it learns. It's what it learns over time that makes it good or bad. It's not that one is, that you can just say, hey, all dogs are bad because they're wolves, and then we teach them to become good. No, I think it's sort of a, people start off neutral. It's sort of a neutral thing. People are just people. It's what you learn and what you do as you go along that determines whether you're good or bad. I wouldn't think that somebody who but this whole idea that humans are just born bad, I don't know where. I mean, maybe it comes from your sort of belief in the original sin or something, but I don't consider humans that way. I think I would rather say, hey, most people to me are just neutral. They're just amoral. They don't do moral things. They don't do immoral things. They just do what they do. I think it is their actions that I see that I base whether they are being good people or being bad people. But that is merely based around my own requirements of morality, which is sort of, are they contributing to society? Are they contributing against society? I don't take this opinion that all people are bad and it's just they need to be good in some way. No, I don't take that stance. I don't know why you do.
Well, I think that there's a couple things that lead me to it. I think the first thing is, even for somebody who's raised right, I think that ultimately and there is such a thing as being raised right. I want to be clear on that. I think that there is, first off, I think if somebody was raised either wrongly or you could call it neutrally, tend to turn out bad. They tend to be at worst negligent and probably lazy and probably not reliable, maybe self-centered, and at worst criminal. So you need people who are good around you in order to turn you into a quote good person. I think that's partially because without good influences, you wouldn't be a good person. But if you don't necessarily have bad influence, you just have, say, neutral influences. In fact, here, let me give it. This isn't a real example; it's a fictional example. But have you, by chance, seen or read The Boys?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, the character Homelander is a good example of what I'm talking about. He wasn't necessarily raised by bad people. Now, of course, this is fiction, but nevertheless, really, it was neutral. He just didn't have a mom or a dad, and at least in the opinion of the show writers, that leads him to be narcissistic and essentially a sociopath, right? I tend to agree. I think humans are left to their own devices. That's pretty much what you get. You need people who are good, society that's good, as well as parental figures who are good in order to instill the good, because it's not there by itself, right? But then also, let's say you do that, and then everything kind of goes wrong. Nothing, in my opinion, when you have somebody who's instilled with the good, I won't say nothing. The vast majority of people don't remain good, right? They revert back to what I would consider to be their base mentality, right? In fact, for me, this is a very important thing when it comes to my ideas of forgiveness or not wanting to judge people overly harshly or in a hypocritical way. Wanting to, we brought up, I want somebody to be, to have rehabilitation. I also like rehabilitation. I don't think it's necessarily the point of a penal system, but that aside, if somebody said, okay, but if you have what you think a penal system should have, plus rehabilitation or minus rehabilitation, which one you go with? I'm going to go with the plus because I think that's a good thing. The whole reason I even think that is because I think that it's little more than circumstance and a series of urges which were indulged that led that person to where they are versus to where I am. In other words, I don't see a whole lot of a difference between you, I, and the members of the live chat who presumably are not hardened criminals and those people I know who are, with the sole exception of they were placed in a situation where those urges were open to them. And like the majority of people, they decided that they would, in fact, go through with them. Whereas for most of us, we've never been placed in that situation, or we've been placed in a situation where if we were to indulge in those kinds of urges, the consequences were so overwhelming, which is a good thing, that it was not tenable. You know what I mean? Now, is it possible?
Yeah, but CJ, I just want to interject something that I don't see that much difference between us and people who are, generous and do amazing things to help other people. That's the thing. You're sort of discounting all the people that have been, given Nobel Peace Prizes and have been generous and charitable all their lives and have lived for others all their lives.
Well, even with a lot of those people, I think there's a series of circumstance, and I think it's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, but I mean, you're basically describing that, hey, humans are a social species, and without socialization and sort of enculturalization, that if we don't have people around us, I was trying to look up one of there was a number of cases of feral children, right? Children, literally being raised in the wild, kind of thing. There was a case of one woman who was basically raised by wolves. She went on to live a relatively normal life after she was reintroduced to culture. That was unusual, but it still happens. I mean, yeah, humans do badly without other humans. We are a social species. there's no getting around that in any way. We need to learn from, you're basically just pointing out a biological fact about humans and saying, well, humans that don't get other humans turn into very, very broken versions of human. Well, yeah, we're a social species, but you'll find that the same in any species. If a social monkey can't be raised in a troop of monkeys, it will turn into a very, very bad approximation of what that monkey's behavior would be in a troop. Like,
It
there's
isn't even
nothing.
just socialization, though, right? It's like if even socialization with people who are either bad or who are just not explicitly good
Sure.
still leads to very negative consequences.
Well, I mean, I don't think explicitly good. I think that that's sort of a contradiction, because you've sort of said nobody's explicitly good. Everybody's, born bad. But if you just get, sort of people raised by the most average, boring parents in the world, I don't think they turn out bad. I don't think they turn out morally bad and, criminals and stuff. I think that largely what they turn out is usually boring, the most boring people in the world. I don't think you're sort of pointing out that, hey, our upbringing and our psychological development as children is mostly influenced by the people around us. Sure, but I still don't think that's an argument for saying that humans are intrinsically bad.
Well, so let me, and you do have a point as far as the, well, you've already said that humans can't really be intrinsically good. And so intrinsically, I would say no, but it's sort of like a domino effect. You have one group that has its, established morals, and then another one, and so on and so forth. And they're able to pass along this sort of illusion, I guess, for lack of a better term. At least that's how I would consider it. But like, if you have a group, like say you have a kid who is not, who isn't growing up with actually, you know what? I don't even have to give a hypothetical. It is well known that people who do not have both parents are at risk for a whole number of problems, right?
Sure.
If you don't have both parents, this is not an insult to you. I didn't either. It happens, right? It doesn't mean you're necessarily messed. But that is irrespective of whether or not the parent that remains is a bad parent. In fact, it's irrespective if they're even a necessarily boring parent. They could be a good parent, right? The lack of the second figure by itself is already enough for somebody to have a significantly higher probability to be a criminal, to be sexually promiscuous, to be a drug user, to be violent, so on and so forth, right? That what that is demonstrating to me is, outside of very ideal conditions where you have two solid parents that instill a morality into you from a young age, people typically don't turn out great. And even when the society at large is able to rehabilitate those people, or when society at large is able to create a large number of families that produce people who don't otherwise need rehabilitation, when everything breaks down, they end up going back to that anyways, regardless of how well it happened or how good the rehabilitation is. There is, I think, no clearer example of this kind of thing than the various wars that have cropped up, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, Syria. Venezuela wasn't a war. It was just a dictatorship that took over, right? And all of the sudden, people who were raised with a society that had strong moral backbones, a society that was freedom-loving, all these other kinds of things, they turn on each other and people start committing atrocious acts, right? Russians are not inherently evil, but the Russians who are in Ukraine are doing terrible things. And likewise, the Ukrainians who are capturing Russians are also doing terrible things, right? In Venezuela, criminality is shot way up, right? In Syria, people were feeding mothers their own babies, for crying out loud. It was absurd levels of atrocity that took place in Syria, the likes of which sound like they come out of a comic book. You know what I mean? In other words, it's the same people who were instilled with morality, who were raised right, all these other kinds of things, and it just went awful as soon as the illusion was broken, as soon as the society that was built around them ceased to function in an ideal way, everything went bad. And even you didn't even have to have an extreme situation. We both live in first world countries, so we both have ghettos, I assume, or poor areas.
Yeah, well,
right?
let me address that first. It's sort of so these extreme situations that you're sort of pointing to. I see the thing is that when you're talking about behavioral things, and I do agree with Noam Chomsky, he sort of said, "Hey, we've all got the capacity to be a saint and a gas chamber attendant." Right. That's basically what he said, that all that changes is the circumstances and the mental duress that we're put under. So the survival instinct in humans is strong. So sort of terms of famine, you will do almost anything to be able to eat, kind of thing. That is how you're wired. I kind of I don't agree that has some kind of evil. It is just the way that nature operates. So I think maybe where we're talking past one another is that you're sort of attributing moral designations like good and evil to natural process, which is sort of the naturalistic fallacy, that you're sort of saying, hey, there's these moral things that because they're natural and because people do them and because people have the capacity to do them under certain extreme circumstances, then all humans are inherently immoral. And I don't think that's true. I think that under extreme circumstances, people will do all kinds of things. But we've also seen that you're discounting under extreme circumstances where people will do absolutely heroic things. And mothers will sacrifice themselves to save their babies. Why are we discounting all of these examples and just focusing on the ones that are the horrible examples? And again, it's because naturalistically, you're wired as a parent to try and save your children. That's just a natural process. But we sort of attribute morality to them. I'm not sure I'm on board with the naturalistic thing, but to sort of cherry pick sort of instances where people have done horrific things in these circumstances, or just horrific things in the name of war and killing, I don't think is fair to the entirety of humanity, the scope of what people have accomplished. I can bring up people sacrificing themselves at all stages. I mean, yeah, a lot of German people did horrible things to the Jews, but a lot of people sacrificed themselves to stop the German Reich as well. Is that something that is good? And does that make us intrinsically good? I don't think so. I think that is a case of the German people, being the subject of propaganda, and the other people being told of these atrocities and that they should stop it, and being part of the other side of it. So I get that people do horrific things. I get that. I don't think that's just makes humans intrinsic. Like, I'm still not seeing the link to intrinsic evil, like intrinsic without behavioral and psychological sort of confinement of how you think to be able to set up that behavior. I still don't see it.
Yeah, so there's a couple things actually, and I want to try and be very brief with them so that they are, because I mean, if I continue just waffling on, then I'll muck my own point, right? So the first thing the first reason why I see these as being, we'll call it of greater value, I guess, than some of the positive things, is that I think that evil deeds have more of an effect on how would I put this? Well, I'll put it very simply. If you've murdered one person, you're a murderer, even if you've given to charity for your entire life, right? In other words, a lifetime of charitable giving seems to be outweighed by a single unspeakable act.
Right.
And I think that's largely true. So, like, for example, we have guys like Harvey Weinstein, right? Great
Sure.
philanthropist. nobody cares, rightfully so, because
Yeah.
of the things that he did to various different women throughout his career, right? Um,
Right.
Now, that, whether or not he could be rehabilitated or anything like that, that's obviously another question. But so we do tend to have this mentality that a small amount of bad outweighs a very large amount of good, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is these breakdowns, to me, what they reveal is that when the illusion of structure disappears, the illusion of morality disappears with it. And now when I say illusion of morality, I'm not saying morality in and of itself is an illusion. I'm saying this idea that humans are generally moral creatures is an illusion. I think for the most
Well,
part,
no,
we're actually
I
quite
agree with
immoral
that.
creatures.
I think that basically, no, I 100% agree with that, because I think that morality is a social construct.
Well, and so for different reasons then, but we would agree on that, right? So we would agree on that.
I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't
Right.
think there is such a thing as a real morality. I think it is something that humans codify between ourselves in order to make a society. And once society does disappear, yeah, that's exactly what we should see if morals are a social construct. The thing is that what I don't think disappears is empathy and reciprocity. I don't think those two things disappear. I think they're still there.
See, and now this is where I get to then that the third point. And so I think both of us, if both of our ideas here are true, as far as yes, it's a social construct. So if the society breaks down, we would expect morality to break down. Makes sense. Also, if morality is a truly existent thing, but humans are generally immoral, then we would also expect the same, right? So we're at the same place there, right? The other thing is the level of depravity that takes, like you brought up, it can be very natural. And sometimes that's very true. We even tend to have sympathy when that's the case. Like when
Well,
somebody
hold
steals
on,
because they're
hold on.
hungry, right?
Hold on a second. If morality doesn't exist without human society, if you're saying, hey, it breaks down, well, I guess that's not what you're saying, because you're saying, hey, morality is still there, kind of thing. But without human society, people do what you consider objectively evil. The way I would frame it is, without society, things are just amoral, right? They're not immoral, they're not moral, because there is no morality without society to have morality. Then it's just amoral.
Yeah, and that would be a major part of a disagreement with us, right? Where I would say
Right.
that these things are, and society breaks down is not to such an extent that it necessarily disappears, but nevertheless, point still taken. I would definitely.
So I guess my question would be, if morals come from a god and not from society, and society breaks down, morals disappear, why do they disappear if they come from a god and are written on everybody's hearts?
Well, so there is that could be a little bit loaded, to be honest with you, because first off, from a biblical standpoint, there is kind of a dichotomy in humans. So there's this word concupiscence. It's got two different definitions. One is more about a sexual thing, but theologically, the definition of concupiscence is a natural inclination towards sin. And so in most theological frameworks, at least in Christianity, we would affirm that humans are concupiscent, that we have a natural inclination towards sin. At the same time, we would affirm what's known as the Imago Dei, image of God, and say that there are certain qualities of God that we can't help but feel, right? And those are both true on the Christian worldview. Those are both true at the same time, right? Which in a way makes the immoralities worse, because when I do them, I know what they are. I'm not deceived, in other words. Sometimes, certainly deceived people exist, and I'm sure everybody has been amongst their number at some point. But on my view, because both of those things are true, when one indulges their natural concupiscence, one is doing so with full-throated knowledge that what they're doing is evil, usually, at least. Not necessarily always. Certainly moral disagreements do exist. So then the second element of that is, okay, why would society break down? Well, because I think the concupiscence, the natural inclination towards sin, exists within humans. Essentially, the breakdown of society is the breakdown of a a pressure to keep one acting properly, right? So you still know going out and murdering people is wrong when society breaks down, but without that pressure, you're free to do the thing you know is wrong because there isn't anything that's necessarily holding your feet to the fire to do it, right? So even in these situations, you'll sometimes see good things come out. You brought up braveries and stuff like that, right?
Sure.
The depravity, though, of what will come out in these situations is intensely absurd. And I don't want to take too much time on this, but as an example, I brought up the Syrian war, right? Which, by the way, is a war in which the government was actually functioning the entire time. So it's not even a full-on societal breakdown. And the kinds of atrocities
involved too.
Yeah, they were, and they themselves were doing very evil things, right? But the kinds of atrocities you see, because you brought up, okay, when somebody steals, right? And we can make sense of somebody stealing to feed themselves. We even tend to have sympathy for that. Not necessarily excusing it, but we tend to have sympathy for that. But that's not the only immorality you see in this situation. You see situations where people executed thousands upon thousands of Yazidis for believing in the peacock god, or people who locked women in cages and then took their babies and then cooked them up in a nice chili and served them to the starving mother without telling her what it was, right? Or just mass amounts of sexual assault, the likes of which is almost comical if it wasn't so horrendous. You know what I mean? And none of these things are required to keep one alive. None of these things are quote unquote natural per se. They're like cartoonishly evil, but they happen, and they happen all the time whenever situations like this start to happen. All of a sudden, the numbers of Jeffrey Dahmers goes from 1 to a couple million overnight, it seems. And maybe it's a little bit longer than that. Maybe it's a couple months. But you see what I mean? It's like, and that level of depravity, in my opinion, cannot be explained merely by people reverting back to a more naturalistic means of behaving. It's like there's something intensely wrong with them. And I include myself in their number because I am not so deceived as to think that I'm just infinitely better than the guys who joined ISIS. Something happened along the lines that I'm a guy who likes to give to charity and be nice to widows and stuff like that, and they're joining ISIS. But if you switch the roles, whatever happened to them happened to me, and whatever happened to me happened to them, it's very possible you get the exact same personality each time, even though you have a completely different human being. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that drives me to say humans have, there is an inherent evil in us where
so CJ, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my question was, why, if the God still exists, and why, if morals are objective, why, if morals aren't societally constructed, do the morals go away when society goes away? That was my question. You sort of just dwelling upon these awful things, and they're awful things, I grant you. Yeah, they're horrible, horrible things. Gotcha. Why is it they go away when the society goes away and the God's still there and the morals are objective?
Well, so that's what I brought up a little bit earlier, right? Where I was saying, because I believe humans are both inclined to do evil things and also inclined to do good things. We have an imago Dei and this concupiscence. I think that without societal pressures, very often we will indulge the inclination to do evil things, and with societal pressures, we'll indulge the inclination to do good things. The inclination's still there. The guys who did all the horrible things I was talking about, I think they were perfectly aware that what they did was wrong.
Yeah, but I think there were probably people there who tried to stop them. I think there were people there who didn't agree with them. There's probably people there that didn't. The mother wouldn't have agreed with them. She would have struggled against it had she known what was going on. The whole point is that you're sort of saying, hey, everybody was in on it. Everybody does this. Everybody, and you're ignoring all the places where people don't. There was generosity, in the Syrian famine of people coming in and trying to help. But through all of this, like, you're talking about some extreme circumstances where people's survival instinct is activated, and you're saying, hey, they didn't need to do this to live. Did they think they needed to do it to live, because it isn't important whether they could have found another source of food and stuff. This is it's absolutely revolting. I get you. But did they think they would die? And at the end of desperation, they because like you're omitting the fact that there was a grievous famine where people were literally starving to death. Right?
Well,
if you're faced,
Yeah,
I would not think this way, but somebody who is starving to death may do insane things in order to get food. The whole idea that they were doing this, yeah, it's absolutely horrific, absolutely horrific. But you're talking about so what I'm saying is that you have society that gives us morals, and you're sort of appealing to societal pressures to enforce the objective morality that you say everybody knows, and that God enforces or in some way imparts on us. I don't understand. Like, why does somebody need moral pressures? And the whole idea that I'm saying is that, hey, if it is simply a societal construct, if morals are a societal construct, then exactly what we see should happen when society collapses. That people don't have the social construct of morality anymore, but you will still see empathy, reciprocity. So you will still see instances of people helping people, because that's empathy. You will also see instances of quid pro quo, people doing things for each other, because that's reciprocity. And that's exactly what we see in this circumstance.
So there's two, I think, different points there. There's the one about why we need societal pressures, and then there's the other one about in my view, this is what you would expect, right? I would just say, in my view, this is also what I would expect, because I think that there is this sort of yin yang, if you will, of humankind. We are concupiscent. We have a natural inclination towards what we would, of course, call sin, but what you might say is immorality, or maybe even want to use more vague language than that. Things which we tend to view as immorality, right? But we also, at the same time, have the Imago Dei within us, which in the Christian view is to say that we have certain qualities of God that we can't help but feel, right? So if societal pressures were to break down, I would think that we would have a lot of people indulging that concupiscence because there's nothing to tell them not to. And it would still be true that we would see some who are trying to operate in a more moral way, because that Imago Dei is still there as well, right? So in that particular regard, I don't think it necessarily proves or disproves either of our view, because I think both of us would probably expect the same thing. To the first point, though, I want to be clear. The instance I'm talking about with the baby and the chili was ISIS soldiers, for whatever they're called, doing that to a Yazidi prisoner. So she didn't do it because she was starving. She just thought she was getting her daily rationed meal, right? They did it because they got some kind of a sick, pleasure from it. And those stories that's one particular story that I remember reading about from the Jerusalem Post. But stories like that are shockingly common, where people...
Wait, hold on. So they were still in a societal setting. They were soldiers in a group, right?
Well, ISIS is somewhat of a society, yes. I mean,
well, of course it is.
Yeah. So to a certain extent, I could even say that there's a point there. It's not full-on anarchy. Full-on anarchy, there's not a lot of situations in history that's full-on anarchy, admittedly enough. But the system that was set up that was keeping everybody at bay had dissolved at that point, such that guys like ISIS had risen and guys like the Free Syrian Army had risen, and so on and so forth, right? But like I said, these situations, they are shockingly common. I don't know if you're a war buff or not. I am, and sometimes I wish I wasn't, because you find situations like this that it's like, I don't know, people have this weird thing that happens where all of a sudden it becomes like a game, like suffering is fun to them. You know, and
Yeah,
that's
well, I mean, I don't, you know, I get that under extreme circumstances, this kind of things happen. I get that. I don't particularly want to go into details and stuff because it isn't that nice what's happening. It's just, you know, when you're looking at moral systems, and let's use it descriptively, like the morals of ISIS are horrendous. You know,
yeah,
like
agreed.
it's what they will do and what they'll do thinking, you know, they will blow you up, yelling Allah Akbar, God is great, and think they're doing you a favor by getting you into heaven is absolutely atrocious and despicable by my moral standards. Sure. Yeah, I got you. Yes. But you're sort of saying once society breaks down, all of these things happen. But there were people trying to help each other there as well. So you can't just go, well, these people did despicable acts and ignore all the people trying to help bring food or assist their neighbors or try to help in these situations. I'm saying your view is to sort of see only the bad and ignore any good act that anybody does and sort of attribute that to the image of God. I don't think that's the case. I think you would have to, you know, your sort of thing of you're indulging this evil sense. I think you would have to somehow demonstrate that. Um, I mean, I could certainly demonstrate that the breakdown of any society, including, you know, chimpanzee for society, for instance, turns incredibly violent, insanely violent. Any animal, any organism I could point to becomes incredible. Well, any social animal, I should say. You know, the ones that are individualistic are less prone to this kind of chaos. But you know, any society that breaks down, whether it be in humans or in animals or anywhere else, you're just sort of stating a fact of nature and sort of saying, well, that shows that humans are intrinsically evil. I don't see how. I don't see how you make that link. Um, it's not like, you know, people want to go out and do this, but at the same time, you'll describe it as, oh, well, they're indulging this want of theirs to do this. I don't see how you reconcile those two ideas, that they know it's wrong, yet they're indulging their want to do it. I don't understand how you reconcile those two.
Well, you know, it's interesting. This is only an anecdote, but Jeffrey Dahmer has been on record numerous times saying he was fully aware what he did was wrong. He just didn't care. Um, which I mean, to be fair, my saying he didn't care is a little bit of a paraphrase, but he did it anyway. Is basically the point. Like in fact, it's actually weirdly enough, it's an admirable quality. I know it's weird to say that Jeffrey Dahmer had admirable qualities, but he was actually quite adamant when people would say, "Oh, well, what caused you to be this? Was it a societal thing? Was it because the way your parents raised you, or all that kind of stuff?" He was quite adamant in saying, "No, it was me being evil. That's what it was." Which why exactly that happened, I don't know. I don't know the psychology of that individual, but nevertheless, you get the point, right? It's like so. At least in that one antidote, and the Martinez serial killer said something very similar.
Yeah, I mean that
Ramirez.
anecdote. It's an anecdote. So Jeffrey Dahmer was, I mean, he was clinically insane. So when we're talking about morality and moral decisions, it's usually the code of conduct that applies to rational people, not irrational ones. Now, I think Dahmer did care. Dahmer's an interesting one because he's not actually a psychopath or a sociopath, and we'll get to them in a second because that's really important for what we're talking about. Um, the Jeffrey Dahmer, I think he was borderline personality disorder. Anyway, but he was clinically insane. Like I don't know why you would
Well,
use the example of.
he was declared legally sane at court. That was
I think he was sane enough to stand trial. I don't, you know, I don't think. I think that he's not sociopathic or psychopathic. I'm not sure if he's you know, I'd call him sane though.
so. I guess I would want to know what the definition, and it could be a legit definition. I'm just curious. What is the definition you're using for sane there because he was declared medically
Yeah.
sane and therefore legally sane.
Well, no, hang on. Okay, so Jeffrey Dahmer was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, but he was found to be legally sane at his trial. So when you're talking about legally sane, you're talking about whether that diagnosis of his mental illness caused him to commit these crimes or not, right? So is he if he was sort of, if he didn't have these diagnoses, would he have done the same thing? And I think the answer is yes. For my money, I think he is absolute madman. I don't know why, the courts found him to be legally sane when he's been diagnosed with, borderline, which we've seen a lot of criminals have borderline personality disorder, and some sort of schizoaffective disorder. It's very strange. But the case is that he was still diagnosed with these things.
Yeah, I think that I think those are probably not as big of an indicator as criminality as you might believe. And I guess I don't know for per se because I don't know exactly what you would believe about it. But like borderline personality, for example, there's millions of people who have, I think it's millions of people who have borderline personality disorder. The majority of them are quite well functioning. Certainly, there are higher rates of criminality amongst them than other people. There's no doubt about that. But it's not like, I don't even think it's higher than a placebo. In other words, placebo was like 23%, right? Now, granted, completely different categories, so it'd be kind of a category error. But it's just an interesting thing to think. I'm not even certain that 23% of people with borderline personality disorder are actually criminals. Perhaps we would be able to look into that and see. Schizotypal is actually a relatively benign psychological disorder. Essentially, the main qualities you have from schizotypal disorders are an extremely vivid imagination that can sometimes border on slightly delusional, but delusion is a word which can have a wide array of usages. I mean, depression can lead you to be slightly delusional, right? As well as a very asocial personality, and I don't think they even have hallucinations, if I remember correctly. That one is one I have a little bit of a history with, because for a while, I long and short, I went to juvie. A judge ordered me to take a psych eval. That was the initial thought, is that I might be schizotypal. That turned out to not be true, of course, but as a result, I had to learn on it. And I could be misremembering it because that was a while ago. It was probably, my goodness, 9 years at this point. But nevertheless, so I think that's a big part of the reason why he's declared legally sane, is because, and that's why they say even if he didn't have these things, he potentially would have been a criminal. I don't think there's any way you can know that, of course, but that's the guess they're making, is because a lot of the people who do have these same qualities are not threats to society at all. In fact, even a majority of them, right? And they're not disorders which cause you to be so delusional as to not be able to distinguish reality from non-reality. It's like a psychotic disorder.
I guess I'm just sort of arguing that I wouldn't use somebody with sort of 3 separate mental disorders as sort of a baseline example of humanity. I don't think that's a very fair representation of sort of, how somebody can be normal. But I'm glad you sort of brought up sort of mental health disorders, especially neurological, like psychopathy, for instance. So how do you explain the lack of morality that psychopaths, and to a same degree sociopaths, display? If morality is not rooted in neurology and behavior, how do you explain that?
Well, to a large extent, I wouldn't, only because I'm not don't really know a whole lot about sociopaths and stuff like that. As far as the base question, I would just say that I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea that the brain has a large deal to do with why we feel the way we feel. As far as like being what I would call moral creatures and stuff like that. I don't think that I think that there's plenty of room in an objective moral philosophy to account for that being like a mechanism by which that's received. Um, in fact, I have a buddy, Chris Date. He's a Christian physicalist, so he would just flatly say, "Yeah, no, I just agree that is the mechanism by which it's received."
Okay.
No, I'm not, of course, but nevertheless, you could. So I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I could definitely see a deficiency in the brain causing one to have a warped view of morality, and that still being applicable or not applicable, but still being accounted for under my philosophy. But as far as anything greater than that, I just wouldn't, because I'm not. I don't know enough about sociopaths in order to make us serious. But I will say this. First, the reason I brought up Dahmer was only just to say that, at least by his own admission, he feels like he was very much aware that what he did was wrong. And the other thing about Dahmer is I do have this, it's a nervous chuckle. It's not like, oh, this is so funny, but it's like I do have somewhat of a chuckle at, there's one Dahmer, and I guess, we even say other serial killers, so we'll say 100 or whatever, however many there's been at a given time. And then when everything goes haywire, all of a sudden there's a lot more of them, like thousands to millions of them. You know what I mean? And so there is a relation, I think, between my bringing up Dahmer and my bringing up ISIS, in so much as that, or just the Syrian war in general, not ISIS itself, in so much as that it's like, seems to be an awful lot of people who are functioning only because they live in a society that allows them to function.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're a social species. That's what I say. But even with the breakdown of a larger society, you'll generally get people pooling into smaller fragments. So this is where we've got to distinguish between in-group and out-group. Are you familiar with those? Yeah, so it's sort of an us and them mentality. So people and morals in general, which is sort of bringing it back to the moral absolutionism, that people generally don't feel like it's bad to hurt or murder someone of the out group, someone who doesn't belong to their group, right? So even throughout human history, people have said, oh, well, they're not us, but we can do whatever to them. It's been a very common thing, but always sort of on your in-group, the people that you see as your family, your friends, your people, it's always been bad to do the same to them. And we see a lot of that in the Bible about how you should treat, the Jews and the Gentiles, or the Israelites and the Gentiles, rather. So what I don't get is the idea that there is this sort of universalism about morality, where it clearly hasn't been interpreted that way for a majority of people through a majority of time, if that's your out group, right? If that's some other group of people than yourselves. To me, that speaks more of a biological imperative, and the empathy being constrained to your in-group, rather than some sort of factual moral law, because it hasn't always applied. As the in-group expands to cover, America rather than a state, and the world rather than America, it seems like we're seeing a lot more of these sort of moral, what we used to be universals, to be actually universals.
Well, so I think there's two things. The first thing is, I would want to make a distinction between things which are universal truths and things which are universally practiced. So like if I were to say it's a universal truth, meaning a truth that is true regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, era in which you live, so on and so forth, that would not be the same as me saying this is a universally practiced truth, right? If I say it's a universal truth that murder is wrong, that would just simply be saying that murder is wrong regardless of who does it and why they do it. Whereas a universally practiced truth, of course, would be to say all people have done that, which there's a sense in which morals are kind of universal in that sense, but not, it's a complicated thing. If you're familiar with C.S. Lewis's work, The Abolition of Man, or his commentary on the Tao Te Ching, he kind of explains this by way, he just calls it all generally the Tao, to say there seems to be a universal truth that is only vaguely understood by societies. So like I've used this example with you before, right? Where it's like, it seems like everybody agrees that murder is wrong, and it doesn't seem like anybody agrees on what exactly murder is. Which is interesting because it's like there's a half universally accepted truth. The truth is, the universally accepted truth is the concept. Murder is wrong. But the details that make up the concept, we don't seem to have any agreement on. Like you said, there's a lot.
Let's change that, because sorry, you're using a legal distinction, so that just means that unlawful killing. So I think killing is wrong would be the one that you're after.
Well, yes, but let's make it a little bit stricter than that. I'll agree with you that the legal definition is too strict, but let's say unprovoked killing of a human being. We'll put it that way. It tends to be agreed upon by societies that unprovoked killing of a human being is wrong. I
don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I mean, the fact that ISIS is out there, the fact that people do preemptive attacks, I think that is, I mean, the fact that America invaded Iraq shows that is not true.
Well, that's kind of the point of where I say, like, the concept versus the details, right? Because each one of those respective groups, ISIS, America, any preemptive striking group, they agree that concept is true, and there's all these details that they don't necessarily agree on. Like in the case of ISIS, that applies to us, which doesn't necessarily. It's that in-group out-group distinction you're talking about, right?
But yours was the statement that unprovoked killing of a human being is wrong, and what I'm saying is that there's all these societies that would not affirm that to be the case. They would affirm that to be not the case.
Yes, yeah, I would disagree with that claim. I think they would affirm that to be the case, and then they would have all these elaborate ways to get around it. Like, for example, with ISIS, they would say that the fact that you're an infidel is a provocation, or a preemptive strike would typically say that that's that is a form of a provocation. Some people go about it by trying to dehumanize the other side. They make them less human. It's less wrong to kill them, right? So that's why I say it's like the concepts itself. It seems like everybody has this concept that, at least in some instances, an unprovoked murder is wrong. Typically, it's an in-group thing, as you said earlier, right? Killing us is wrong.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody, because we have all of our elaborate ways of getting around that, right? So they don't agree on the
and out groups, and absolutely,
yeah. And a lot of times that tends to be most, I think, of our core moral truths have a very similar thing going on there. Like most societies, for example, would affirm that you have to honor your elders in some sense. Some societies have a vastly different understanding of what that means. Like, for example, there's societies where, like old Scandinavian societies, being a graybeard would be kind of shameful in some areas, not all of them. There's obviously the Scandinavians were made up of a whole bunch of little tribes, right? But at least some of them. You see this reflected actually in the story on which Hamlet is based. So the way to honor them would be to find a way to let them die gloriously in battle, right?
Sure.
So
I'm just wondering how sort of the idea that unprovoked killing of people is wrong when applied to something like the Vikings?
Because they would still affirm that that's wrong in their in-group. They find ways of getting around that being wrong outside of their in-group, right?
Right.
So that's exactly what I'm saying. The concept is there, the details are not.
But now you're going to, like, you started off with murder, I get that. Then we went to the unprovoked killing of humans is wrong, right? That's what the original thing was. That's what the core of it was. And then as I point out these societies that don't adhere to that, you're then refining it and refining it. Now it's unprovoked killing of humans within your in-group is wrong. So you're refining it down and down and down and down and down. Right?
Well, no.
So
I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here, because what I'm saying is that I think that that people universally have agreed that concept, if you just told them the concept, they would probably say yes. And then when you look at the way that it's actually practiced, the details don't always add up. Nobody agrees on what a provocation is. People don't agree on what a human being is numerous times. There's this dehumanizing of the out group, which therefore makes it easier for them to kill, or that simply not having the same religion as you can be considered a quote provocation, right? So the concept reigns. But the details and how it's put into practice, that is not universal, and it never has been, right?
Yeah, but if you're saying sort of the killing of unprovoked of humans is wrong, and you put that to a Viking, he would say no. Raiding is their culture, their life, their style. That's what they do. They go out and kill humans in order to do it. That's what they did. In fact, sort of the way that their culture revolves around it, part of it was seen as sort of a act of honoring the gods kind of thing in this sort of Germanic sort of culture that they had. But that aside, you're sort of saying, like, if you get a society where the unprovoked killing of other humans is acceptable, like, let's not even say, sort of good, it's just acceptable, that sort of culture will not survive. It will fragment, it will break apart, it will be destroyed, because just any culture where those people go around killing themselves. But that wasn't the original thing. You said to agree to the unprovoked killing of humans in general is bad. And I'm not sure a warlike culture would agree to that.
Yeah, and I guess to an extent, there's a certain way, or there's a certain, like, I don't know how we'd, I guess, prove this particular point definitively
on
the
Mayans,
but I would just disagree with that. I think they would come up with ways of justifying what they did do, while also trying to maintain the concept as true, which is why they have murder laws in their own society.
But you're not giving them modifiers to your question. You're just saying, is the killing of like, look at the Mayan society the Incan society that killed tons of people as sacrifices. I don't think they would agree to that. They wouldn't say, hey, no, sometimes it's an honorable, wonderful thing because of their religion, or because of the sacrifice brings the blessings of the gods kind of thing. I don't think they'd agree. I don't think that's a constant. I think you're looking at it through a very, very sort of Western modernistic view. Whereas if that question could be posed to somebody in a very warlike culture, they wouldn't see a problem with killing humans. And then when you say, hey, you mean your own humans? No, not their own humans, but other ones are fine. I don't think you're sort of, if you're going to put that question to somebody and then sort of say, oh, but they'd immediately assume we're talking about their own family and their own people. I think that if you sort of put it to them as, is unprovoked killing of your people fine, they would say, no, that's not fine. I get that. Like, I get that. But then you're talking about a culture that would somehow survive with people, members of that culture, killing each other completely unprovoked. And I don't think that would even survive, much less, be around to be able to ask questions of.
Yeah, so I think that there seems to be, I guess, a little bit of a disconnect where, to me, the qualifiers, where you're saying you're not giving them any qualifiers. And what I'm saying is, no, the qualifiers are things that they add themselves. In other words, this is why I'm trying to distinguish between these details and concepts, right? Like Aztec society still has murder law, and Incan society and Viking society, they all have murder law, right?
Sure.
But they have these elaborate ways of trying to get around what they themselves already accept, which is that these things are evil. And so all these, and it varies from society to society, but they have all these different ways in which they interpret what seems to be a universal truth, right? And something that they even accept as a universal truth. It's kind of like, it's almost like,
if it's a universal truth and God has written it on their hearts, then why is it so diverse over all of these cultures?
Well, I think it goes back to that idea of the dichotomy that I think Christianity presents with humans. We are both equally concupiscent and equally creatures made in the image of God. And so while there is a unavoidable sense in which we all do some of the same things, including having a lot of the same, at least conceptually, laws. And there is an equally strong sense in which we all do very evil things, which can lead to a lot of differences in our laws, because we all have these different ways that we're getting around what we've accepted to be truth. You could almost use the example of food, right? Obviously, all societies eat food as a universal truth. But a Jew doesn't consider pork to be food. An American doesn't consider dog to be food. And a Chinese person, to be honest, they don't really seem to have taboos as far as meat is concerned. But I'm sure they do somewhere, and I'm just not aware of them because I'm not aware of their culture. But nevertheless, right, it's like what constitutes food seems to vary from society to society. But of course, we all agree we should eat. Now, that is obviously something that's more driven biologically. But I'm just saying you can see it as an example, right? Where these concepts are universal and everything around them is not universal.
Well, I think that these societal structures are driven biologically. Like I keep saying, we're a social species. Sociality is part of our biological makeup. That is something that we are. But I'm just having a hard time sort of believing you. You're sort of saying, hey, there's this sort of spiritual thing that's driving us towards what you're calling evil, as opposed to the image of God spiritual thing that's driving us towards good, or at least that's what I'm getting from what you're saying. But you're sort of describing a situation in which people have societal structures. Those societal structures have vastly different ideas of what's right or what's wrong within the confines of this sort of overarching thing. Now, you're saying there's something objective behind there. It makes a lot more sense to me that it is just societally constructed. As you change the society, the expectations of that society changes. That makes a lot more sense to me than you have somehow this spiritual objective thing behind it that's pushing you in two different directions. And so societies have reacted in different ways. And I mean, I don't even know where you begin with that. Why one society like the Aztecs are killing people for the worship of their gods, to another society which thinks that killing, maybe the Jain, for instance, the Jain over in India, who believe that they won't even kill an ant kind of thing. They think that's bad for their karma. So you have this massive disparity between that, and somehow it's sort of this push and pull from exactly the same objective moral standard, exactly presumably the same thing written on these people's heart, because I wouldn't imagine that a God would write different things on different people's hearts. But you have a complete black and white from one side being able to sacrifice people by the hundreds of thousands and presumably even millions to I don't think they've got an upper limit on the amount the Aztecs sacrificed, and on the other side you've got not even killing an ant. It just seems like this idea of objective morality, it doesn't explain why that disparity exists at all. It just sort of tries to accommodate for it. So I can't really take into consideration these claims when it is way better explained by societal constructs and the simple way that that social animals work, rather than some kind of overarching morality that just exists, but we can't seem to find it.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess I don't know where a lot of the rub is coming from what I'm getting at, right? Because it seems to me like if the biblical claim is true, which is that we are both inherently sinful and inherently good creatures, we should see that push and pull in reality. Now, that seeing that push and pull doesn't mean for sure that the Bible is true, but if the Bible is true, we should see that, right? So there should be some sense in which all mankind has God's law written on their heart, and that appears to be the case. Conceptually, human beings consistently have a lot of the same mores or laws, right?
Except for sociopaths and psychopaths.
Right, but we could say we can say, taking into account the fact that some people have a physical deficiency, this tends to be universally true of societies, because it is. There's no society that has murder.
Yeah, right? But if God's writing morals in everybody's heart, then so what you're sort of saying, this moral intuition, right, is sort of what you're talking about, this intuitive, this is wrong when you think about it. So what did a psychopath do to God to stop them from feeling empathy towards others, and therefore not know basically that these things are wrong? Because they can't even imagine what somebody else feels or thinks. They have no concept of it. They will just say, hey, I don't care what they think, because they have no sense of empathy. So what did they do to God to get skipped over in the line of this written on their heart?
Well, I think that would be kind of the wrong question to an extent. I don't necessarily know what the right question would be per se. Maybe the question would be, why would such a thing exist? But I don't think it's obviously normative for people to have two legs, but sometimes people are born without it. I don't think that they did something to God per se that causes them to have this deficiency.
Well, hold on. Doesn't the Bible say that everybody? I mean, the Bible doesn't say everybody will be born with two legs, right? It just says everybody will have this written on their heart, correct?
Well, it doesn't say it explicitly, but it does say that the way it words it is the Gentiles is what they're talking about. When they do that which is right under the law, reveal the law of God written in their own hearts. It's in Romans chapter 2, I believe. Might be 3.
Romans 2.
Yeah. The full-throated sense that you're talking about, as far as each individual and with relative clarity, the Bible says that only happens to a person who is a regenerate believer, right? So that would be a result of being saved at that point. And even then, I think that there's still, you still have to take into account the dichotomy in human will. Actually, obviously, you wouldn't get anything theological from it because you're not religious. But if you're ever just interested in some reading, I would suggest going through the book of Romans, even if it's just for fun. Which, not to say there's anything wrong with that. I've certainly read a couple of religious texts that were not Christian just for fun. But I think you'd be interested to find, because Paul deals precisely with what we're talking about right now, as far as the dichotomy between.
Let's see what it says. For it is not those who hear the law righteous God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, for they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So it's basically saying they know what they're doing is wrong and have conscience about it. And psychopaths literally don't. Psychopaths, they have so little of a conscience, they can full lie detect tests, because they don't think that anything's wrong. Like they literally think that it's fine.
Yeah, and without getting into the psychology element of it, just because I'm not qualified to do so, I would see that similarly to the way I see somebody who's born without a leg. In that, we obviously have to, in any view, we have to account for the possibility of physical deficiency. And so therefore it's perfectly possible that somebody, because of some physical deficiency, namely a mental deficiency in the mind, or in the brain, I guess, because I would make a mind-brain distinction, they may not have the same result that a otherwise normal functioning human would.
Why?
Which I guess that would just be the best that I could say about that, right? Like I don't suspect that because there is a creator God that would mean these kinds of deficiencies cannot exist, unless that he specifically said that they couldn't. Like if the Bible were to say that, hey, these are things that are not going to happen, and then they did, that would be one thing. But it doesn't seem to be claiming that no such mental deficiency would exist. And beyond that, I just really can't comment too much because I don't know enough about sociopathy and psychopathy. I do know that there are people out there like Dr. David Wood, for example, of Acts 17 Apologetics, who, despite being sociopaths or psychopaths, one of the two.
Sociopath David Woods.
Yeah.
Yeah, a sociopath.
Yeah.
So a bit different. So the difference between them is so they have no emotional empathy. They have a lot of cognitive empathy, so that they have a lot of ability to see other people's behavior and read them really well. Nothing registers emotionally. So
Okay.
they cannot understand how you feel, right? They can understand what you're doing, your actions, and what you're trying to do. They cannot connect with how you feel. So for instance, I might get hurt, right? And you would understand how I feel, right? You would go, hey, you get hurt, it's really painful, that sucks, right? That's what happens, because I've felt that. A psychopath would literally say, I don't understand what your problem is, right? I don't, like, your emotional state does not resonate with them in any way, shape, or form. Sociopaths, they're not born, it's not a neurological thing like psychopaths. It's behavioral. They learn this over time. So usually experiencing some sort of trauma or some kind of being in some kind of very, very severe psychological state can cause a disconnect from your emotional empathy. So they're not the same, but they're very, very similar. But one is learnt and one is actually neurological. The reason I went to psychopaths is because they're from birth, psychopaths, because it's neurological, it's their brain structure. They literally have no sense of empathy. They cannot connect with anybody else. And I kind of see it as not their fault. I mean, presumably, in your view, God made them like that for some reason.
Well, actually, yes. Being a Calvinist, I think that God has foreordained everything for some purpose. I don't necessarily know what that purpose is, but to a certain extent, that would certainly be true. But yeah, I would say to get back to the question, though, as far as if we have a universal morality written on hearts, why would it be that some people seem not to have that? I would just say accounting for deficiencies that arise from some sort of a physical problem. This is something that will be true.
I think I have to clarify. I don't think it's that they don't seem to have it. They literally don't have that. Well, I mean, it depends what you mean written by their heart. And I have problems with this statement because, so written on your heart, this is the thing. It has to be some sort of metaphor, right? With what we understand the heart to do. It has to be metaphorical. Because your heart doesn't actually make any decisions. It doesn't do anything. I know that you feel stuff in your heart, but we know that that's adrenaline pumping your heart faster. We know that the effects of adrenaline make your heart beat faster, and therefore we say we feel it in our heart. But it's not actually, like, the heart doesn't make any moral decisions. It doesn't make any decisions at all. It is simply a pump for pumping blood around your body. So unless you mean, and I'm not like, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be insulting, I'm not trying to be pedantic. I just, when you say written on your heart, unless you mean it's been told to you in some form in your brain, and you're using written on your heart as a metaphor,
Right.
I'm not sure what you're sort of alluding to with the heart. And so maybe me clarifying what you mean by that will help.
So I guess written on the heart, if I could explain it in the most literal way, would be to say that, like, how would I want to put this? There is a, I want to make sure I'm wording it without any sort of a metaphor or anything like that.
No, that's
There
fine.
is,
That's fine.
so I would say, I think written on your heart would mean, at minimum, it probably means something along the lines of these things become somewhat intuitive or natural. And in a full sense, I would say, because there are two different senses in which the Bible uses this. There's the sense in Romans 2, which is more general, and there's the sense you'll find in Jeremiah 31, which is a little bit more specific. So at the minimum, I would say it's that these things are to a certain extent intuitive. And at its max, I would say that these are things which are sort of like a fundamental part of your personality, right? Where it's like you want to do these things or not do these things, depending on if it's an odd or a not. From something that arises from your own will. So written on your heart, you could say, is a way of saying naturally arising from your will, I think would be the best way to put it.
Okay. So do you see that as a product of the brain, or do you see that as a product of maybe a soul, or where do you see that coming from?
That can be kind of a complicated question, I'll be honest with you, because I tend to think it's more of a product of a soul, but I also think that the brain has something to do with it, right? Like, I think the brain could potentially operate as a conduit for all the things that we could kind of consider soulish. And there's other things I feel about this as well, not to derive on them, but like I tend to think that humans are generally artistic, and that's a result of soulish, quote unquote, qualities of ours. But I don't think the brain is completely irrelevant in that situation. I think that the brain, like I said, I would not be surprised if it operated almost as a conduit for that, or maybe you could say as a motor or a database, or how exactly it works, I'm not sure. If we were not soulish creatures, like I don't believe animals have souls, I think there'd be elements of it that kind of replicated it, because they're clearly animate creatures with a level of self-awareness. But
animals can do art, right? Elephants can paint and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Or how dogs are like incredibly sympathetic, or probably empathetic is probably the better word. Yeah. So I think that there would still be a limited extent to that being, like I said, animate, and at least to a limited extent self-aware creatures, but it wouldn't be to the human extent, where we seem to be absurdly philosophical, artistic, moral, etc.
Well, I don't know. I have all the artistic ability of a rock, to be honest with you. I mean, I can't. I'm very good at logic and things like that, but I'm not very good at art. I think some elephants would beat me on. So I think it all depends on the humans. And quite frankly, sometimes I do think that some humans are lacking logic to the point that animals are sometimes better. I've seen crows behave more rationally than or logically than humans sometimes. So it's I don't know about that one, but yeah, no, I get your point that there is a cognitive difference between humans and other animals. I do understand that, sure.
Yeah, and so the other element, though, is like, if you didn't have the brain, I mean, nothing works, period. Right? Sure. I mean, you just have a body. In fact, you might even have a living body if your brain dead, but it's living in the most technical sense you can possibly imagine.
Right.
So yeah, so it's a little complicated, but I would say probably ultimately deriving from the soul, but I don't think the brain is irrelevant or even of small importance. I think it's probably of very significant importance. Um, how exactly that works, I wouldn't necessarily know. Well, and here's one other thing I would add: I am a dualist, and I take the dualist thing literally. If you're not aware, monism is the idea that we're either one substance or the other, but we can't be both. So, in substance in the philosophical sense. So, are we simply the physical, the material, or are we simply the spiritual? Right? Physicalists would say we're physicalists. Certain old Gnostic groups like Docetists would say we're spiritual.
I don't know how they can even make that argument anymore. I think that's largely just died.
Yeah, and for good reason, because it's I mean, especially when you have situations like Phineas Gage, it's like that's completely impossible.
Right.
But I take a dualistic perspective where I think human beings are kind of fundamentally made up of both. I think that we do have spirits, we do have souls, and also you don't have, people talk about like disembodied spirits. I struggle to know what exactly that would look like. To me, it's almost like gas without the car. It's like, okay, I mean, yeah, it's there technically, but it's not doing anything.
Well, I mean, you can have gas without a car. That's not a problem.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it is there. It's just, it's not like, it's not like it's a disembodied car. The function of the car is no longer present if both of those things are not together.
Oh, right? I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would certainly disagree with that. I do apologize. It's getting on. I probably should leave it to sort of, getting on to 3 hours, which are not your fault. I was really enjoying the conversation, and
totally good.
We can certainly pick it up again. Yeah.
I was actually meaning to ask because, and this is largely my fault, I think, but I don't think we actually got to the actual topic. We did kind of, but not as much as should have.
Yeah.
So
probably not. Yeah, that's okay.
Would you be willing to do like a part 2 some other Monday down the road? I keep my out of house conversations on Mondays unless it's an open room, so that's why it would have to be my Monday, which I think it's probably your Tuesday actually.
Correct. Yes, that would be my Tuesday.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you'd be willing, I certainly appreciate it. And also, not that you don't already know this, but feel free to use this content however you like.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I usually record it. This one I didn't. I don't know why. Just I assumed I could just download it. But thank you. I really appreciate that. I was actually going to ask by the end of it, so that's great. I think it's sort of productive, and I feel like we spend a lot of time on hypotheticals and not actually a lot on like, for instance, how my moral system operates. So maybe we can go a bit more into how I would classify my morality and where secular humanism is coming from, because we didn't really touch on secular humanism at all, and mostly focused on sort of your religious aspect. And I sort of, getting to the end, I am conscious of that I didn't answer a lot about secular humanism. It feels slightly unfair that I get to grill you on Christianity and how objective morality holds up, and nothing on secular humanism and subjective morality holds up, or relative, morality holds up. So yeah, I promise I'll allow more time for that next time. I think that's only fair. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate that, and hopefully people did get a lot from this. I have a feeling they probably did, because these conversations are always good, I think. I mean, there's not very many people that I can just talk with for 2 hours and 45 minutes and then say, hey, you want to go again? So, you know what I mean? So I definitely appreciate all that. But since we are going to go ahead and shut it down, is there anything you'd like to add as far as like sort of like finishing thoughts or anything like that? And take as much time as you need, but finishing questions, anything like that, things for us to ponder.
You know what? I think one thing I'd like to leave is that I would like there to be an objective morality. Morality's hard. I would like there to be an overarching objective thing in the universe to tell us what is right and what is wrong, without any kind of gray areas and without this kind of interpretation that humans do. I don't think that exists. as much as I would like it to exist because it'd make things easy and simple, I don't think it exists. And so it isn't that I want to deny the Bible, I want to deny, or I want to deny objective reality. I just, from my experiences and what I observe and what I see, I think that is, and people sort of all claiming objective morality and never agreeing on what it is, that I don't think objective morality is out there. So that's not to say that morality isn't incredibly important. It is. It's incredibly important for us to have morality, what we ought and ought not to do in society. People say, oh, well, it's meaningless then. Of course not. Just because the law we made up doesn't mean that's meaningless. It's very meaningful. It's very important, but I think that even though there is no objective morality, it's incredibly important that we sort of figure out what we owe to each other, to quote a very famous book, I forget the author, on sort of social contract and how we treat each other in societies. But I want to thank CJ Cox having me on. Fantastic talk, really enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope to see you again, CJ. It was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you being here as well. And I'll just kind of end with saying, I think that a lot of those criticisms, I think I would probably hold to. I tend to think that a morality that is not objective is very superficial. I think it doesn't necessarily not exist, but it is no different, I think, from a legal system at strongest and an opinion at weakest. And we'll hopefully have a lot more opportunity to discuss that in the future. But with that, I'll just say, shalom to you guys. Thank you very much for being here. If you like this video, please remember to like and share and subscribe if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. And be on the lookout for more conversations like this, because I'm going to try and have more and more guests on, as well as doing podcasts where we go in depth to discuss a certain topic, and maybe have some notes with me too, because I don't really like it when my thoughts are all jumbled. But anyways, appreciate you guys. If the Lord wills and tarries, we'll be seeing you here soon. Oh, one last thing. Frost, if you're still here, thanks for the super chat, buddy. I very much appreciate it. Anyways, shalom, guys. We're out.
Thank you for watching, liking, and subscribing this video. And I want to give a big thank you to all the channel members whose support allows me to bring you more content like this in the future. Thank you so much, everyone.